Welcome back to the channel. This is Trinity Storm, and you are watching first part of What If Naruto Was Saved by Dr. Strange and Emma Frost. If you enjoy this video, please like, share, and subscribe to this channel. And for more exclusive and spicy content, follow me on Patreon. Link is in the description below. And now, wasting no more time, let's start the story.
The scenery was stunning, with tree branches whistling and grass swaying in the breeze. The significance of the past 24 hours was not well understood, and those who did were unaware that everything would change as a result of the impending change. Shockwaves from an explosion high above the ground flattened the grass and even toppled a number of nearby trees. A fiery streak shot out from the concentrated ball of flames, screaming as it flew at the ground at breakneck speed. Ah! And then a loud thunk as it struck the potentially pliable and soft ground. The impact of the falling object left a singed imprint instead of a magnificent crater. In addition to being several feet deep, which suggests a high-velocity impact, it had a human-like shape. The person inside the man-shaped hole moaned, "Oon," as a hand reached up and out before shakily dragging its owner out of the crevasse. A blond young man, covered in dirt and still smoking a little, emerged from the hole. "Oh, fuck me," was the only thing on his mind as he stood up straight and ignored the cracking sounds coming from his back since Gamabunta had nailed him to the ground like a railroad spike with his pipe. He hadn't felt so horrible. He rolled his shoulders and cracked his neck, extending his body's damaged tendons and muscles. This was quite perplexing. His final recollection was of Madara confronting the enslaved Jinchuriki, the names, and the removal recalling the agony of having Kurama's Yuki torn from him. He shuddered. Nothing had ever been like that kind of pain. Kami, however, just as it was getting started, something happened. Kurama. He only recently realized his potential as a Jinchuriki and took control of her Yuki, making her little more than a bothersome voice in his mind. He even gained her trust and collaborated with her in a way. However, they had still been captured. He cocked his head because something was clearly wrong. Something wasn't quite right with his body. He had no way of understanding Kyuubi. She couldn't even conceal her presence this effectively. She simply wasn't in him anymore. It seemed his thoughts were filled with words. Dumbass Kit. In the strangest possible way. Then the Kyuubi's unadulterated power caused the world around him to blow up, leaving him here? He pondered, I wonder, and then used some of the demon's chakra. The attempt brought him to two tails, and he almost went to his knees. There was a serious problem. Drawing on the Yuki had never been so simple. Kyuubi had vanished, along with her consciousness and personality. However, he showed off his fist. He still had her power. This could be just another kick to the nuts, or it could be really sweet. Heck, after their entire power struggle was over, they actually got along pretty well. Even so, she still detested him for the mere act of keeping her in check. However, where was he? It was obvious that these were neither the elemental countries nor any location he recognized. He strained his senses in a panic, hardly remembering to turn them down lest the new improvements overwhelm his brain with data. Even Sage Mode was a little strange when he became aware of what he was feeling. His closed eyes suddenly opened. His wide, red-rimmed eyes reached a conclusion. Chakra. There's no chakra anywhere. He was cut off when a loud blaring in the distance caught his improved hearing. I'm in some weirdo new world. I'd say that's enough reason to run like a little bitch, and he disappeared. Everyone here is a cannibal, if I'm lucky, or worse. He swallowed. What if ramen isn't available here? He trembled in terror at that final thought. It was too terrifying to think about. He came to a stop on the outskirts of what appeared to be a small town after running for miles. The architecture, which he had never seen before, caused his eyes to bulge. He peered down at every person passing by from his perch on the roof. He was fascinated by the enormous metal objects rolling down the streets. He felt an energy signature coming in, and the hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. Even though he wanted to run, he stayed because he needed answers to the many questions that were racing through his head. It wasn't chakra. A tall man wearing a red cape emerged from the swirl of smoke that had erupted in front of him. It took almost 15 minutes before the man who went by the name of Dr. Strange was able to get him to speak and read English well enough to have a conversation, even if, later on, his brain still felt like a fried egg. Then, hoping to get the man home, he had told him everything. Sadly, Lady Luck was throwing snake eyes this time since the man claimed he was unable to. And as he followed the Sorcerer Supreme down the road, he sensed that the already hectic day was about to get even busier. He had transported them to another location he referred to as New York. Through some sort of reverse summoning, however, they were walking the remaining distance for some reason. So why'd I have to stay here? Strange had to fight the impulse to smile as he turned to face the young man. There was something about the boy that made people feel their best. Strange responded without even slowing his pace. There are two races on this world. Those that are normal, having no special abilities, and there are mutants, humans who have evolved to the point where they gain special powers. Like bloodline abilities? The inquisitive blonde inquired. Yes, Like the bloodline abilities from your home mutants were treated in similar fashion to how you say you were treated, though not to that extreme level. Some the government attempted to control, or destroy. Naruto paused for a moment from where he had come. He had hoped that such short-sightedness would have been left behind, but he had no luck. Strange went on to explain. Recently though, things have changed due to a failing on my part. The mutant population, once in the millions, has dropped to mere hundreds, as mutants the world over lost their abilities. Recalling what the man had said earlier, he asked, "You mean the thing that let me come here?" Strange looked at his young friend. Indeed, this place is a school. At one time it was a training ground for mutants to learn to control their abilities, but with so few mutants left, it is now a haven for those that remain. With all the information he had just been given, Naruto blinked. Then why am I here? Can you not guess? The blonde shrugged and said, "Well, not really. I'm not even from this world. I'm not a normal human or a mutant, am I?" Strange came to a halt and then put a hand on the boy's shoulder, telling him to do the same. He had to look down to meet the blonde's eyes, even though their heights weren't that different. He raised his hand, glowing, and held it out to the blonde, palm facing him. "I am not sure, but I believe you may simply be from an alternate reality or another dimension, where humans gained these odd abilities. It is quite possible that you, as well the people in your world, are simply advanced humans, possibly even mutants. You, though, are something entirely new." A little perplexed, "Your body has been altered by the presence of demonic energy, mutating you, so if you weren't a mutant before, there's the possibility you are one now." He tried his best to take it all in. Wide-eyed he stammered, that is, before he could finish. "My sentiments exactly," Strange added, raising an eyebrow as he carried on moving. He said nonchalantly, "You're taking this all rather well." When they arrived at the clearing where the mansion was situated, the sentries surrounding the school emerged from the trees. Naruto ducked his head and said, "Yeah, well, like I said, things back home weren't the best for me, especially if I wanted to live and well, here I am, so I may as well make the best of what the hell is that." Strange understood the surprise of the tall sentinel robots. Even those who had previously seen the metal titans were taken aback. He gave the young man a brief explanation of the man-operated giant's mission, that they had the duty of keeping the peace, as it were. Naruto was completely stunned and unable to speak, since the foot of one of the enormous metal giants could flatten him. He was primarily intimidated. In fact, he was imagining that very metal foot slamming him into the earth right then. He walked with Strange until they arrived at the front door, feeling as though the soulless eyes of the sentinels were piercing his brain. But before Strange could knock lightly, the door opened as he raised his hand to do so. When the door opened, a woman with a somewhat worn-out appearance emerged. "Stephen." "Emma, please, come in," he said, barely reacting to the young man next to him, who was covered in blood and dirt. They passed a number of students as she guided them down the hallway to her office. He asked the question that had been bothering him like a splinter, ignoring the looks he got from the other teenagers and attempting to ignore the enormous one made of stone. Miss Frost, Emma Frost," she said, beckoning them inside through a door. "Okay, Miss Frost, how did you know we were at the door? I didn't see anyone at the windows." She moved to the chair and sat behind the enormous desk. "Yes, well, I'm psychic. The moment you two arrived on the grounds I was able to sense your minds," she replied. Naruto's eyes widened dramatically, astonishment shining in them before dissipating as he stared in shock. "Wait, you read my mind, didn't you? While we were walking down the road?" was said with narrowed eyes, and it was more of a statement than a query. He could not explain the strange tickling he had experienced, but now he knew. She had been observing. Her eyes sparkled thoughtfully as she gazed at him. She answered slowly, "I did, yes," which piqued Strange's curiosity as well. "And?" inquired the sorcerer. She appeared to be peering through him as she crossed her arms. "I tried to be subtle, only looking at his recent memories. He should be proud. His mind is fairly strong, though I was being gentle about it." As the two engaged in pointless conversation, Naruto sat in silence, angry at her for reading his thoughts without his consent and being treated as though he didn't exist. "You know I'm still here," he said with a growl of frustration, raising his left eyebrow. "So who is this?" she questioned, but the two ignored the angry blonde. In other places, "Hey guys, new recruit today." The rock mutant caught the attention of several people. "What do you mean?" inquired a silver-skinned redhead. Everyone in attendance took in the news that Miss Frost took some blonde kid and a guy in a cape to her office. He looked pretty fucked up, too. Looked like he'd been stomped on by one of the sentinels. As Julian pondered, "I wonder who he'll be replacing." Noriko gave him a number of glares and even an angry expression. "Shut up, Keller." She angrily shot back. Cecily added, "Please not now, Julian," drawing her knees to her chest with her silver arms. It was accurate to say, "Hey, I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. There were vacancies as teams lost members as a result of losing their abilities. Additionally, the notion that this new guy might be replacing their friends made them feel resentful. Noriko complained angrily, better not be on my team, and a few others agreed. Perhaps he should be given a chance first, Soraya said, clasping her hands under her robe's folds. Even though her statement made sense, nobody answered because they were preoccupied with their own thoughts. Returning with Naruto. So this boy's people all had a base mutation? Hank will have a field day over this, she said in a whisper. From what little he has mentioned, yes, but what I'm trying to get across is the fact that his body has been further changed, mutated by demonic presence, said Strange. Yes, Emma said with a nod, I'm still not sure I understand that. Naruto covered his face with his hand, murmuring, the demon's power, sealed within him, has been fully absorbed into his body, altering his genetics even further. He is an oddity. With a slight growl in the back of his throat, Naruto reiterated, he is still in the room. We haven't forgotten, was her languid reply. He knows nothing of this world, and with his abilities, the ones he has and the ones he will have, this school is the best place for him. Curious, she turned to Naruto and said, yes, his abilities, what are they anyway? His face furrowed in concentration as he attempted to recall a previous lesson's subject. Jiraiya called it what? Energy manipulation. Yeah, that's it. The uber pervert, Kami rest in peace, had taught him everything he needed to know during their 3-year journey. Emma said, energy manipulation? Again. Yeah, back home we call it chakra, but it's gone by other names too, like life energy. Emma couldn't deny that it was an intriguing concept. Mutants with the skills he mentioned existed. To mention a few, they had the ability to release energy from their bodies through telekinetics, but later on, she would have to ask Strange to fill in the details. She questioned, and you use this energy to do what? He thanked Uruka inwardly for teaching him about chakra theory. It can be focused to parts of the body to increase strength, speed, stuff like that. Then we use hand signs to regulate and focus our energy, and then use techniques. He had never imagined it would be useful until now. He gave an example by creating a shadow clone, which resulted in 37, severely packing the room. Figures had once again lost control after absorbing Kyuubi's Yukai. He lifted his hand and started concentrating his chakra. After dismissing his clones, his proficiency with the technique would compensate for the lapses in control. If he was truly fortunate, after a little more effort than usual, a blue ball of energy began to spin and glow in his palm. Within a few seconds he said simply, this is chakra, and then let the Rasengan go. As she observed his demonstrations, Emma's eyes gradually widened, and they widened even more after he made that ball thing. The degree of control he already possessed in comparison to most people with comparable abilities was astounding. Even though such an ability did seem reminiscent of telekinetics. With a sigh, she leaned forward and placed her arms flat on her desk. Before I can allow you to attend, young man, I need to see your thoughts. I need to be certain that you are not a threat to my students. He could understand how offensive those words felt if it meant defending his or her people. A cage would act similarly. All right. He gave in at last. However, he was tense. He was too reminded of the Mangekyo Sharingan by this psychic stuff. He withdrew to his mindscape, his vision fading. The blonde headmistress showed up almost immediately after he arrived. She remarked, you have a surprising level of control over your mindscape for someone so young, as she surveyed the grassy plain he had made so long ago. Then he changed the layout to a long hallway with lots of doors. I'll take that as a compliment, he said curtly. She casually observed that he was no longer filthy and covered in blood. He was now tall and tidy. In front of her he was really attractive. She had to admit his skin was nicely tanned, and he was tall and lean. Strangely, the scars on this one were a little darker and more noticeable than the nearly undetectable trio on either cheek of his actual body. His hair, which had been matted, now hung in tidy, golden spikes. She glanced around and strode to the closest door. Right away she was stopped in a blur when a hand grabbed her by the wrist of her extended arm. She met the person who had stopped her gaze and awaited a response. At last, he let go and said something. His voice was a deathly whisper. I'll only warn you once. I'm willing to let you roam my memories, but this is my mind. Any subterfuge and I'll know, he said. You're not very trusting. She turned back to the door as he grimly grinned and said, I've had better weeks, so I'm sorry if I seem a little on edge. She glanced back and reached for the knob, but before she could open it, she got a nod of approval. Everything she saw astounded her. Faraway places in an entirely different world. People, both good and bad, from ordinary to extraordinary. She saw people who had taken care of the young man and those who had taken care of him. Regretfully, in comparison to everyone else, they were a pitiful small number. Those who had pursued him were Orochimaru and Akatsuki. She witnessed the mistreatment he had received and his relentless quest to prove himself. She saw how he had been sold out by his entire village at last. She witnessed Kyubi in all her splendor and learned how she had saved him. She had used her power to send him to this world, if a little different, out of resentment for their captors and a tiny bit of respect for him overall. Even though it was a little depressing, it was an incredible life story. She returned to that same grassy plain after finishing. "Are you finished?" she asked, looking around for the voice's owner, and discovered the blonde lying in the grass with his arms supporting his head and his eyes closed. "Well?" She crossed her arms and gave him a mild glare in return, saying, "I am. And, honestly, I'm surprised you're sane." "Join the club," he said, sounding slightly amused. Emma whispered, "Well, that was interesting," as she reclined in her chair. After waiting for her to finish for more than 4 minutes, Strange asked, "And what do you say, Emma?" "He is welcome to stay." Emma sighed. Strange gave a nod and got up. "Then I shall take my leave. I may check in on young Naruto's development. Until then, I wish you the best, both of you," the tall man said, bowing briefly before vanishing into a cloud of smoke. There was an awkward silence for a moment before she cleared her throat and said, "Let's get you settled in. I would like to make you an offer though." With a satisfied sigh, Naruto exited the shower. It seemed as though he had lost several pounds of grime, sweat, dirt, and dried blood. He thought about what Miss Frost had offered the school would assist him because he had nothing to wear. In return, he would assist a man named Logan in a class on self-defense. He was given a t-shirt and a pair of school-issue sweatpants to wear while his only clothing was being washed. He would have to remain in his current state for today, she said, but he would be brought into town the next day to get clothes for him. Not that size mattered, but he was placed in a tiny room. The broken bed he had placed in his former apartment was hardly large enough. Additionally, Miss Frost had stated that he would be placed in a room with another student after the now helpless students departed. Replacing someone who was probably a friend of the current roommate would be enjoyable. He was instructed to wait until she scheduled his classes and to anticipate receiving a physical at any time between that afternoon and the following day. Neither was he anticipating that. He put his necklace back around his neck where it belonged after cleaning and drying it completely. The necklace was just another curiosity. He had no idea how or why it had been around his neck when he dug himself out of his Naruto-shaped hole and he fingered one of the blood-red magatama and took a moment. There was something about the necklace. Even though it would never be able to replace the long-destroyed shodems under his fingertips, it felt both familiar and strange. Hell, if any of it made sense to him, I doubt they ever would. He moved to the bed and took a seat to read the books he had been given. Putting the unanswered questions on hold for the time being, his gaze briefly lingered on the shattered and fractured fragments of the forehead protector that had managed to accompany him. Now lying on the tiny bedside table, his eyes returned to the pages in front of him, unwilling to let his memories fade. He had been reading for over 30 minutes when someone knocked on the door, which startled him and made him uncomfortable right away. A large, blue-furred individual. After introducing himself, Dr. Hank McCoy had arrived to take him to the medical bay for his physical examination, but as the exam progressed, he realized that his purpose was not only to administer the physical but also to satiate his own curiosity by asking as many questions as he could about himself, his people, and the world. A flashback, simply amazing, the furry man muttered in amazement as he reviewed the results, the clipboard exploding with pages. "You're at the peak of physical condition, my boy," Naruto said, shrugging as he continued to examine the boy's entire body. He wasn't sure how to respond to that, but he did feel a little proud. Hank found it all fascinating. Since his body was home to an incredible metabolism, it was easy to understand why his body temperature was a few degrees higher than usual. He had even been as amazed by the results when he had him run on a treadmill to check his breathing and heart rate. His breathing and heart rate were relatively constant while he ran at what many would consider to be full tilt. The constant beeping of the machine interrupted his analysis when he saw the scan's results. His initial annoyance at being separated from his notes vanished. "Mr. Uzumaki, did you know you have a tertiary circulatory system?" "Hun?" A bewildered Naruto inquired. When a sentence contains too many large words, Naruto becomes confused. A projection was shown by Hank. Naruto wasn't really paying attention when he said, "Look here, it flows through the entire body like blood vessels, but at a far greater level of interconnectivity." The lines running through his body appeared to be recognizable. He mumbled in realization, "Oh, something from a long time ago. I know what that is." Hank turned around and eagerly awaited an explanation. "That's my chakra system." Hank was lost. For once he didn't know what the boy was talking about. "Could you elaborate?" Hours of jutsus, chakra, and yuki explanations later, the man's inquiries and interest remained unabated. He even suggested that he might be able to heal others, showing a great deal of interest in his healing abilities. Other than that, It was just like any other physical that Shizune or Tsunade had given him, though the technology was obviously far more sophisticated. If my readings are accurate, which they undoubtedly are, the chakra your body produces is not as a result of mutation, at least, not as a result of the X gene. Hun, your chakra network, as you call it, may have once been a mutation for your people, but from what you've told me it is a normal physiological occurrence. Observing the blonde beginning to lose consciousness, really, did this guy have a translator? Your mutation, my boy, lies not in your fascinating energy. However, your altered X gene does show signs of overactive adaptive capabilities. Subtitles? Did any of the gods enjoy making him feel foolish? Progressive adaptation, simply put, your body adapts itself to stress by strengthening itself. The tertiary effects spread outward from just the physical and into other aspects, your senses, reaction speeds, and so on. All right, he got some of that actually. End of the flashback. By the time it was finished, it was getting pretty dark, not that he could see that from so far below the surface. And his growling stomach warned him that if it stayed empty any longer, it would go on strike. His stomach led the way as McCoy instructed the cafeteria to prepare the evening's meal. This is uncomfortable, he thought, a little amused by the other students' curious, perplexed, and even hostile expressions. He didn't hold them responsible initially. He and Sakura had treated Sai in the same manner, mentally laughing at how simple some of them were to read. He said, to be the new guy, and chose to eat outside instead of sitting at a table by himself. He thought absently about how he should have been surprised by the appearance of some of the students. The man had the appearance of a large blue man tiger, and he hadn't been at all startled by Dr. McCoy. However, given everything he had witnessed, a silver girl or stone boy over there wouldn't be all that unusual, barely receiving a 4.0 on his weird shit-o-meter in particular, since ordinary had never existed in his life. This peculiarity was typical of his life. After leaving the house, he sought a quiet place to eat. Thankfully, he located the location, 14 meters above the school's crested roof. As he ate, he leaned against the shingles and gazed thoughtfully up at the stars. Alongside the New Mutants and Hellions, with stifled laughter, Julian snorted, "That's the new kid? I'm not impressed." Even though he had no authority, David was the most intelligent person at the table. He was aware that underestimating someone was never a good idea, and he had the strangest suspicion that the blonde was not to be taken lightly. As he shoved food into his rocky maw, Santo asked, "Why's he in school uniform? I mean, sure he's a student, but why's he wearing sweats and a t-shirt?" He modified. Brian said, "Who knows?" While playing aimlessly with his spaghetti, he continued to think about his upcoming departure from the school and the friends he would be saying goodbye to. "Who cares?" Noriko added with a grunt. She was clearly unhappy because her gloves crackled and electricity arced between her fingers. Santo swallowed and posed the question that everyone was curious about, "Wonder what he can do." "Can we talk about something else?" "Anything else," Noriko proposed. David sat beside her and tried to reassure her by putting a hand on her shoulder. She appeared less agitated, suggesting that it was effective. Cecily, Jay, and Kevin, the other mismatched team members at the table, remained silent. Julian was more irritable than normal because Sophia had stayed in her room the entire afternoon. Soraya always ate by herself and was never present, but she would have said something sensible about how it was wrong to alienate him. However, Soraya returned to them shortly after. "I believe I have seen the new student," she said while seated on her team's side of the table. Julian muttered, "Yeah, he came through here maybe 10 minutes ago," demonstrating his lack of concern. David inquired, "Where'd you see him?" Soraya thought for a moment before responding. "He was on the roof, eating," she revealed. "Good spot," Jay thought with gratitude. "Then I take it no one has approached him yet?" she asked, glancing around the table. Even though the silence was deafening, it was sufficient. Logan was venting to Emma while the majority of the campus residents were eating. "Damn it. I don't need some kid assisting me." Emma let out a weary sigh. "He has a great deal of fighting experience, Logan, as I've been telling you, and he isn't the type of person to accept the school's charity. He needs clothes and books, and since he knows so much about various fighting styles, I figured a trade of sorts might work." Logan gritted his teeth in frustration. "Yeah, well, if he doesn't meet my expectations, you've got to find another job for him." When he was gone, Emma let out a defeated sigh. "Fine," she said. Logan was by far the most obstinate of the X-Men. Scott had recognized the boy's predicament. "Knock, knock. Huh? Was that?" he moaned in response. He was awakened by the sound of demanding, loud knocks on the door. "Yes?" He stumbled to the door. "Open up, kid," someone on the other side demanded. He opened the door and saw an elderly man with wild hair who was roughly the same height as him. He looked him over and growled, "Get dressed, kid. I'm gonna see if you can handle being my assistant." Something about him screamed, I can kick your ass. Now completely awake, the eyes that had been clouded by sleep widened in comprehension. You're Logan? Get dressed, kid. He put on his freshly laundered clothes and closed the door. He had been up for more than an hour sewing the holes and cuts, but amazingly, even the oldest bloodstains had disappeared. He walked back to the door, slipping into his boots and pulling his shirt over his head. Logan waited impatiently by the door. Even though it had only been a minute, he left without saying anything, followed by Naruto, who understood. This was, damn, he had to admit he had never seen a better training room than this one. There were pieces of equipment surrounding the walls that appeared to be designed for extremely powerful people, and there was a running track between them and the wall. There was also a fairly large training mat in the middle, which appeared to be where they were going. Logan paused in the center of the mat and looked at the blonde, assessing him. Although he didn't appear menacing, the teenager was calm and coiled like a spring. He had been in a few fights. Based on the way he carried himself, he had been made to read his file by Emma. It claimed that he had received ninja training, increased healing, endurance, heightened senses, and something called energy manipulation were all mentioned, but the first two were the most relatable. All right, kid, the lady upstairs says you can handle being my assistant. You know, teaching classes, that kind of stuff, but she's not a fighter. I want to see for myself if you have what it takes. Naruto stood there, if a little tense, taking everything in silence. Naruto's only answer was a widening smile that showed off his larger-than-normal canines. I want you to fight me so I can gauge your skills, and even if you manage to lay a hit on me, I can heal any wounds, so don't piss yourself about holding back. Now that that's out of the way, let's see what you can do. The blonde was on his back with a foot on his throat. 37 minutes later. He was astonished inside. Not bad, you're pretty good, kid, but I've got something you don't. Years of experience. Even he was unable to match the child's level of energy and endurance. And his recovery. No matter how many times he was knocked down, he always got back up. In fact, he had broken the blonde's right arm and leg twice. He certainly had an extremely high pain threshold, but like any experienced combatant, his eyes spoke loudest. They radiated defiance. Not pride, but the straightforward act of spitting in death's face. He took off his foot and extended his hand to the child. Grinning, he got up and said, "You know, you surprised me, kid." Naruto. Whatever most people would called a foul on the blades. Naruto reasoned, in a real fight there are no rules, you just have to stay alive. He said, "Heh, you got that right, I guess you'll do for an assistant," and then he let go of the hammer. Then he added, "Oh, and you should go, breakfast is in 10 minutes. Grinning evilly, the blonde stiffened for a moment before running out the doors, leaving Logan to chuckle at his joke. As he raced down the hallway, he asked himself, why are all teachers so evil? Instead of taking the stairs, he decided to roll over the third-floor rail and jump vertically from handrail to handrail and floor to floor. According to the schedule he had discovered on his bed after dinner the previous evening, he had to take a shower, change, and eat before classes. Unfortunately, he almost flattened a few students in his haste. He cheered in his head, yes, almost there, until a door opened, that is. To keep from running into her, he applied the brakes. He managed to stop after skidding the last foot and a half, but now he was facing a very attractive redhead with silver skin. Their noses almost touching for a single instant. Both parties could only see each other's eyes. One pair is a brilliant silver without pupils, and the other is a deep blue. He said, sorry, as his tanned cheeks turned red. Then he recalled. He muttered, "Damn it," late, as he spun around her on his heel and rushed to his own door, leaving Cecily Kincaid in a state of shock. He said, sorry, damn it, late, and left. She had to acknowledge that when she woke up this morning, she hadn't anticipated such an event. Furthermore, wasn't that the blonde who had just started at the school? She walked to the cafeteria, shaking her head. If only it were as simple to remove the warm blue of his eyes. As he washed, dried, and dressed, he was a blur as he moaned, "I need to get some real clothes." He was definitely not a fan of sweatpants. Less than 5 minutes after returning to his room, he walked out, the door slamming behind him. Damn that man, he cursed in his head before classes began. He had hardly had time to eat. He considered sending a clone, but Miss Frost, the woman in charge, had specifically instructed him not to. But if he was teaching alongside Logan, she would let his clone attend a missed class. This brought him back to his present thoughts, and he cursed the man with words that would have made even a Konoha special Jonin blush. Because so few students engaged with him, he remained comparatively isolated. Even so, the classes were quite engaging. They had learned particular concepts from the subjects in Konoha. Not in this place all of it was taught, and even though it wouldn't be helpful in combat, some of it was fascinating to improve his language abilities. He was currently enrolled in back-to-back English classes. He only mentioned his name when introducing himself in each class. He had long since established a psychological barrier against that kind of behavior toward him, but few people had warmed up to him. The more relaxed members of the classes were the ones who were more receptive to him. One was a teen boy his own age named Jay, who had wings. The other was a green, almost lizard-like boy named Victor. It had taken some time to move past that he became more receptive to their conversation. Jay appeared to be a combination of pacifist and protector, and Victor reminded him of himself years ago, handling things like a joke. Additionally, he had met his friend Lori, who was bedridden in the medical bay, during lunch thanks to the winged teenager, but as soon as he saw her arm, he became concerned for her. It had completely dried out. She was by far the friendliest person he had encountered thus far, and she was a really nice girl. However, speaking with people for the first time in more than a day felt good. He quickly discovered that the afternoons were typically devoted to classes on practical application, where they learned how to use their abilities and refine their skills. Logan was scheduled to conduct combat training with them today, but he had left for personal reasons. As a result, a man whom everyone vaguely recognized as Mr. Summers conducted a strength evaluation on the less than 30 students, including him. He remembered Lori, the girl, saying there was a headmaster with Miss Frost, and according to her, this was him. Students went back to their rooms that afternoon to get ready for the in-person combat training session that Mr. Summer was filling in. He grabbed some study materials and headed to the training gym, pulling on his shinobi gear for the second time that day. Professor Wagner, his teacher, had recommended some plays and poetry books to help him broaden his expanding vocabulary in English. However, it didn't require much assistance. He had given his clone a dictionary from Miss Frost last night, and once it had dispelled, he was reasonably adept at the B's. With the temporary start that Strange had given him, it wasn't too difficult to figure out what. He opened a book and began to read while he waited. Leaning against the steel wall, a man who exuded a militant rigidity was the first to arrive. Even so, when he introduced himself, his tone was gentle, if somewhat severe. He said, "We'll be doing strength tests today. This will give us an idea of your capabilities," and Naruto nodded. "Makes sense, I suppose." The visored man asked him about his world, the people, and what they could do while they waited for the other students in the class. His curiosity appeared to be aroused by Emma Frost's and most likely Dr. McCoy's mention. With a thoughtful frown, Scott said, "Eventually, we'll need to record all these techniques for your record." This made sense because any known techniques were listed in the Hokage's ninja files. As the conversation shifted to a less serious tone, Naruto asked a question he had been wondering about ever since he had met the man. "So, what's with the visor, sir?" He added a sir, because he knew it was a respectful term for older people. "I release energy blasts from my eyes. Unfortunately, I can't turn it off. This visor allows me to see without vaporizing everything in sight," he said in a straightforward, somewhat accustomed response. "Cool," the blonde said with reverence and wide blue eyes. Scott grinned to himself. That was what new pupils always said. "Oh, here come your classmates," he said as he noticed the others, all dressed in their team uniforms, beginning to file into the room. He declared, "All right, everyone gather in the center of the room," and started. 5 minutes before, Cecily pondered out loud, "I heard Mr. Logan wasn't going to be teaching us today." Santo complained, "Then why'd we still gotta go to class? Isn't it obvious we've got a sub? Wonder who it is?" Julian snorted, rubbing his chin reflectively. Santo inquired, "You think the new kid's gonna be there? Most people believe that you could get the best impression of someone in the training areas. In addition to that, some students wanted to know what the blonde's mutational capabilities were." "I just wish we had the danger room," Julian moaned pathetically. "The danger room gave you the opportunity to experience missions, while the regular training area was rather high-tech. The general consensus was that the DR was the sole method of training. In reality, only the most dedicated students relished the less thrilling training area, which both tested and enhanced their strength." With a gravelly laugh, Santo said, "Heh, I guess you all get to see me at my best." While flexing his enormous left rock bicep, Kevin and Soraya silently trailed behind, refusing to participate in the discussion. The latter was deep in contemplation, while the former had nothing to say. He had been angry and self-loathing ever since he'd unintentionally withered Lori's arm. "So boring," moaned Julian as they arrived at the door of the training gym. When they were there, it opened on its own. Santo said, "Hey, we got Cyclops today," as everyone looked across the enormous room at the headmaster. As the remaining students filed in, the Hellions and New Mutants stood apart, except for their teammates who were depowered or disabled. Cecily wondered, who's Mr. Summers talking to? The figure appeared somewhat familiar, especially in that attire, when only his back was visible. It was standard procedure for the students to be split up into groups and visit the danger room or training gym on a rotating basis. Naturally, that was the time when there were more than 100 mutant students at Xavier's. Now that there were only 29 of them, including the blonde child, They were all instructed to form a single group. Cecily scowled. Lori was nowhere to be seen. This clearly indicated that the most recent attempts to treat her arm had not been successful. She was unable to join them because of her dried-out right arm. Out of the corner of her eye, she glanced at Kevin, who was clearly still thinking about what he had done to her arm. Life can be so cruel at times. Even though she had long since accepted her mutation, people continued to avoid her skin. Kevin would also most likely never be able to touch anyone else. She had once attempted to date him, her mercury skin unaffected by his death touch, but he was constantly thinking about Lori. In any case, his stony face was awash with shame and discomfort. Actually, he hadn't been at fault before he discovered that he was one of the few people who had kept their abilities. It seemed like a blessing when everyone woke up days ago losing their abilities. She understood when she looked in a mirror and saw Mercury staring back. Her heart almost stopped at the prospect of losing her liquid metal skin. However, Kevin had discovered his abilities were still present in a more traumatic way. Overjoyed at the prospect of being freed from his curse, he touched Lori right away, fulfilling a long-standing desire of his, and her arm was almost completely withered. When their substitute's voice, as even and strict as ever, clipped through the air, she snapped out of her reverie. The blonde next to him turned around as he said, "All right everyone, your attention, please. Since Logan couldn't be here, instead of the danger room obstacle course, today we will be testing your strength, speed, endurance, and agility, and see how much it has changed since the last test 2 weeks ago." At last, Cecily recalled why he appeared familiar from behind. The new student was the same one who had almost run her over before. She had hardly looked at him before, except for his eyes, in the hallway. Additionally, he wore academy sweats at other times. He was now wearing navy cargo pants with bandages around the ankles and calves and a form-fitting gray short-sleeved shirt. He was among the best-built people she had ever seen. She had to admit his face, too. He had blonde hair, very blonde. It might be said to be the epitome of sun-kissed. It appeared wild and disheveled but entirely natural, hanging in shaggy spikes everywhere. Nevertheless, the same twin cerulean eyes that she had previously seen were visible between the bangs, gleaming with an unreal warmth and kindness. Additionally, his face and jawline were extremely tan and appeared to have been carved out of marble. She shook her head in an attempt to get her thoughts straight. Of course not. She couldn't possibly feel anything for a man she didn't even know. Wasn't it impossible? There was no basis for personality, even if he appeared to have a lethal body. Jay had mentioned meeting him at lunch, claiming that just minutes earlier he had taken him to see Lori. He had claimed to be a decent man, but she would hold off on making a snap decision because Jay had a tendency to be overly trusting. What was the guy's name, according to him? Naruto, something. Mr. Summers instructed them to move from machine to machine in a brief circuit around the room. Last to go was the newcomer, Naruto, as Mr. Summers called him. Some of them had to strengthen themselves upon arrival, and the majority were openly shocked by his strength. His strength was only second or third from the top as the exercises progressed. Although Julian occasionally used it to see what he could telekinetically lift, the final machine was only meant for students with enhanced strength, like Santo. The blonde eagerly asked the X-Man, "Are we allowed to augment our strength for this one?" Cyclops paused for a second. "Are you capable?" In actuality, Logan had not mentioned increased strength, and they were still constructing his file. The teenager said, "Sure," and approached the machine. The blonde was the center of attention as he approached the enormous press. Few people were able to use it, even prior to M-Day, and now he was going to give it a try. "All right, I'll start with my normal chakra first," he said as he stood on the platform, the blue energy coursing through his body. Scott asked, "Ready?" in an attempt to sound comforting but giving himself the option to change his mind if he wasn't positive. In response, Naruto nodded. He would never back down. That was it. He had decided he would do it. He entered the pad and stood on the designated target area. One by one, the weights were gradually lowered after being split into 200-pound increment plates. The machine, which was shaped like enormous slabs, measured the amount of weight you could lift. His straightened arms were slightly bent by the first plate, but he could manage it. It wasn't until the fourth plate that he began to struggle. "More, please." He had fallen to his knees under the weight after the fourth one was added. Santo laughed and duly took the 5 from Julian. Told Ya he wouldn't make 800, he said. Cecily shook her head in disapproval of their actions. "Men," she said with a frustrated sigh. "Hold on." Was the temperature rising in the room? It felt like a warm breeze, but it wasn't much. Though small, it was still there. Everyone could see that Mr. Summers was going to take over. A faint growl came from beneath the weight slabs where he was crouching. "Huh?" asked a few students. The blonde stood back up slowly, Her bones making a loud realignment. A pair of bright blue eyes with slit-like pupils were visible when the eyelids suddenly snapped open. Minnie saw right away that they radiated from the dark of his spiky bangs. He said, "I can take more," in a deeper voice that was almost a scratchy growl. This feeling, he thought nostalgically. He recalled how powerful he had felt when he had first wrested the Yuki away from Kyubi and said, "There's the first tail." Even though she had been furious for a while, he could still feel a hint of pride in everything she said. Simply put, she respected strength. However, he had never really been able to gauge the strength he had acquired as a result until now. In retrospect, losing her Yuki had significantly softened her. How long was that before everything went to hell? No time to bitch, Med. This most recent development caught Cyclops off guard. The boy, Naruto, appeared to be at his limit just a moment ago, but now he practically exuded raw energy. In fact, the temperature in the immediate vicinity of him appeared to be rising, and a number of other people had similar thoughts. "What the hell?" Santo exclaimed. You said it," Julian agreed, watching the weights rise with narrowed eyes. Telekinesis was not the cause. What was it? He was already lifting 1600. Shit. Observing more intently, Cecily saw the shift in his eyes. The way they shone out at them made her shiver without realizing it. Wait, he pondered after he had taken away the demon's power. Everything was under his control. Why can't I draw out any more? Why can't I go farther than 2 tails? What was different? Alright. Dumb question. What was happening? His knees started to shake at the 6-ton mark, and he was breathing shallowly. He called out, That's it," to indicate that he had reached his breaking point for the time being. As he straightened up and the plates lifted and locked, he received numerous looks of amazement. He couldn't help but feel a little sheepish at all the attention. "He's the second strongest in the school, only a little more so than Onyx," Scott thought. A series of groans of frustration that any Nara would have been proud to call their own ensued after he cleared his throat to draw everyone's attention and said, "The only student stronger is Santo. Okay, 5-minute cool down, and then lapse." He whispered to himself, "Why couldn't I go any higher than 2 tails? He had felt as though he had struck a wall at the second tail. This was so annoying. My god. "Hey, Naruto." He briefly forgot his dilemma when he noticed Jay approaching with a sizable group. Jay. He smiled amiably in acknowledgement. He could live with the reluctance of some of the other members of the group. "Naruto, meet the Hellions and the New Mutants." "Hellions? New Mutants?" The other teenager saw his error. "Oh, sorry, they're the names of our 2 teams?" Naruto gave a nod. It was logical. He bowed his head slightly and said, "A distinct pleasure, meeting you all," as courteously as he could. Jay's expression begged his friends to be kind as he turned to face them. Soraya took the initiative and moved forward. She said, "Soraya Kadir, it is a pleasure to meet you as well," and then she bowed. Josh Foley, the gold-skinned blonde, said, waving amiably. Before continuing, a girl with blue hair let out a loud sigh. "Noriko Ashita," she said, a little shivering, and then she folded her gauntleted hands across her chest. "Fishcake, really?" The rock teen thought the name was hilarious and guffawed. Naruto twitched with annoyance. Why was that how people always referred to him? Indeed, his name was the same as a common ramen topping with the kanji word maelstrom in it. Why did no one ever notice that? Nano knew it's fishcake every time. Soraya put her hand on the girl's arm and whispered, "Noriko," letting her know that she was being extremely impolite under her roommate's eyes. The blue-haired girl lost her confidence. A black-haired teenager in red said, "And we're the Hellions. Jay and Soraya are ours." The name's Julian Keller. The rock teen said, "Santo Vaccaro," in a gravelly voice that was appropriate for his body type. The teen in the dark leather jacket said, "Kevin Ford." And lastly, there was the Hellions' final member, a familiar face. "I'm Cecily Kincaid," the young woman with red hair and silver skin said. I gotta apologize for this morning, that's all Santo interrupted. "This morning?" It was time for him to hear some amusing nonsense. "Yeah," said the blonde. "I was in a hurry this morning and nearly ran her over," he said casually. The rock teen was let down. Rock teen depressed. The rock teen continues to think about himself in the third person. Julian said, "So what else can you do?" And then he said, "Yeah, from Santo." Julian. Cecily growled. Asking someone about their mutation at such a young age was frowned upon. As a child, Santo whimpered, "Come on, Cess, you saw what he did." Naruto laughed a little at the big teen's actions. "Heh, no, it's all right, I can." Cyclops yelled, "Everyone, start jogging around the track. Break's over." The track was easily a quarter-mile long and circled the room. Naruto chose not to respond to their complaints with a perplexed query. He could easily run all day without getting tired, really. They started running in a big herd-like group, groaning at the interruption in private. He marveled at Santo's ability to maintain such a fast pace considering his enormous bulk. "You were saying?" Julian asked casually, attempting to avoid coming across as irritated from the 100 yards already behind them. Naruto paused, considering how much to reveal to them or, more accurately, how much they would think the big plus was that Kyuubi hadn't fucked anyone in this world, and when they finally found out, he really didn't want to make friends only to be dumped, so screw it all. There is a large reserve of energy within me. I can draw on it and use it to do stuff. My senses are all enhanced and I can heal very fast. Santo was so shocked that he briefly stopped jogging. "Is that all?" he inquired after regaining his balance that was simply too much to process. It wasn't sarcasm. After a brief pause, Naruto continued. "No, there's more at birth. A powerful creature of pure energy was sealed within me recently. I absorbed its power as well," Dr. Strange said. Josh questioned incredulously, Wait, you know Dr. Strange? Stephen Strange? Sorcerer Supreme and stuff?" Everyone turned to face Santo. Yes, he was the guy who brought me here." The rocky teenager, a little winded, puffed, "What?" Noriko let out a groan. "Some guy in a cape, Jesus, Santo." The blonde teen asked, perplexed, "Did I miss something?" Noriko let out a frustrated sigh. "Nothing, go on." He let it go, still apprehensive. "Well," Strange said, "my genes had kept mutating, this time by the demon's energy." With her eyes narrowed behind her veil, Soraya questioned, "The creature was a demon?" "That's what my people called it." He shrugged, ignoring the explanation of that small nugget. I said, "Anyway, Dr. McCoy said that 10% of my DNA is unknown. We assume that means that while I am a mutant, a fraction of me is demonic." They kept running, but they were staring at him with wide eyes. In fact, he laughed. He muttered, "You're taking this better than my old friends," in an attempt to be humorous. Cecily was close enough to hear him, so she asked, "What?" He gave a headshake. "Hey, nothing, forget it anyway. Thanks to the demon, may she rest in peace, or hell, whichever she prefers, due to the demon's energy, my own grew exponentially. She gave me my healing, these eyes." Soraya, who was at the back of the line, inquired, "And your teeth?" When he was at the weight press, she had observed their sharpness. He said, "Heh, yeah, the demon was a fox, so I got some similar characteristics. I gotta say, I always liked them. I tap into its power and start looking even meaner. They work great for intimidation tactics." With a toothy smile that revealed his teeth were not too far from normal now, he didn't appear at all tired or breathless, and he had been speaking the majority of the time. "But I digress. My naturally high stamina and endurance increased to even higher levels when he was still in his mother's womb." He did not mention that these gifts were the result of Kyuubi's chakra. "This is so freaking unfair," Santo complained sourly. "Why's that?" asked Jay, to the surprise of the group. Naruto let out a deep laugh. "Think about it, he's got more powers than the Avengers. So unfair." He said he was finally able to stop after almost a minute. "Not all power is a gift, Santo," he said wisely. The tone made many of them stiffen, though they weren't sure why. It was warm, gentle, and incredibly old. Despite all the power he possessed, he believed that other things were far more valuable. The things he had never had but had always desired. The items he had never been permitted to possess. As the group of teenagers grunted in relief inside, Mr. Summers yelled, "All right. That's enough," from his place at the head of the tromping line. They sat against the metal wall and allowed it to cool them. As they all cooled, he chewed his lip thoughtfully and said, "You know, I'm surprised you're all taking this rather well." He was ecstatic, but he kept it to himself. He hadn't noticed any expressions of disgust, hatred, or fear, the typical stuff. You know, it was mostly a surprise. "Naruto." He turned to Soraya and said, She asked, "You never said why the demon was sealed in you," and they all gave her a startled look. However, he grinned in response. "That is a rather connected subject," he said in an attempt at a creative diversion. Julian's bored tone demonstrated his lack of interest. "Yeah, well, this is the last class, and it's done," he added. It wasn't just him. The blonde was the center of attention. He received a few nods and understanding looks when he said, "Okay, but no interruptions. It's not a story I want to repeat. Well, for starters, I'm not from this world." Naruto scowled at Santo and said, "You're an alien?" He said sharply, "Dr. Strange says I come from an alternate Earth," and went on, "In my world, there was a single powerful demon. It was horrible. At least, that's what I hear anyway. It was destroyed, separated into 9 weaker, yet still dangerous, demons. These demons. The Biju. The tailed beasts. Each more powerful than the one before it. Anyhow, I was born the day one of the Biju decided to crush my home village, and thus it was sealed in me. He didn't trust them enough to share the details. Pain Myobokuzen, the host of the Eight Tales, is Karabi. His dad, his mommy Tobimadara. The war had already begun by the time he had become as amazing as he was. Thousands of shinobi had already perished. Looking back, he couldn't regret giving him up to put an end to that. Reanimated shinobi from legend, an army of Zetsu clones, enslaved, reanimated Jinchuriki, and their Biju. Oh, the fact that it was for power did not make him happy. That old tidbit. Additionally, it was somewhat humiliating to gain complete control over Kyuubi's power only to have people he trusted stab him in the back shortly after. At the end of it all, he had been battling the masked jerk head to head. The epic failure of his attempt to end the war might have made him extremely depressed if he were anyone else. Dude, you're a hero, Josh said. That's debatable. You should talk to the villagers back home, he believed. Well, a few days ago, some rather unsavory individuals finally managed to extract my demon for some plan of theirs, not minding that it would kill me. So they offered my village a deal. They'd trade them power for me. He continued to be perplexed about that, or perhaps that was the denial resurfacing. I was tied and gagged in less than an hour after what should have been a few days of agony from the extraction. All I remember is a really big explosion and a burning me making a crater in the landside. In this world, Kyuubi's consciousness is gone. And I have absolutely nada in regards to answers. Oh, and did I mention most of the people in my world can do what I can, if on a smaller scale? And that we are a civilization of ninjas? Nobody said anything, but at last, Josh bent forward. My head hurts, he moaned. He got curious looks all around, but they stopped when they stopped trying to find any indication that he was lying. Cecily questioned, "You're not lying, are you?" With stifled laughter, he snorted. Then he caught something. I wish it was a lie. If none of it were true, my life would be so much easier. One eyebrow lifted in conjecture. Wait a minute, you all believe me when I say I had a demon inside me, but you have trouble believing me when I say I'm a ninja? What the hell? A huge drop of sweat forms. The words, "Do not take it personally, Naruto," were said calmly by Soraya. While it is indeed a great deal of information, in the past the X-Men have fought numerous enemies. Mutants, aliens, crazy humans, big-ass robots, the occasional demon, just a normal day around here. But ninja, that's a new one. Sure, there's a ninja cult, but those weenies don't really attack the X-Men on a regular basis, joked Santo. Yeah, well, thanks for not poking me with a cross or dousing me in holy water. That gets old real fast. Mutant, demon, ninja, don't worry, I'll still kick your ass for you, Santo continued. Laughing heartily, Josh and Julian also laughed. They all observed Naruto's smile turn savage at the challenge. He changed almost immediately after class, and Mr. Summers informed him that he would be taking him into town to get some clothes. Naruto pointed to one of the numerous big items in the garage and asked, "What is that?" "I saw a lot of them in that town where the doc found me. I know it's a transport, but that's it." Naruto shook his head and said, "It's called a car. You don't have them in your world?" Scott was intrigued but chose not to press the issue, saying, "No, I mean, civilians and nobles use horses and sometimes trains, but as ninja we didn't need either. We could usually cover distances fast enough on foot." Naruto's eyes widened at the sheer number of people in the town. Not even Konoha was this large. This was more akin to the size of Fire Country's capital here. Things were unquestionably different. Even the mall he had visited with Ero Sennin in the capital was nothing compared to this. Eventually, he was able to block out the nauseating fumes from the hundreds of cars that had been ruining the experience. Riding behind what Mr. Summers had called a 18-wheeler was extremely painful. The fumes had threatened to kill him. He was led to a rather sizable store outlet known as the Gap, to put it simply. In order to give him some privacy, Mr. Summers had left him to find multiple pairs of clothes while he went shopping for himself. Being a shinobi had an impact on his search, and the blonde was powerless to stop it. He kept that in mind when choosing the majority of his wardrobe. The woman who was assisting him seemed happy to do so, which confused him back home. He had never experienced such a response. It was a little eerie. He couldn't help but think of Konoha as he gathered clothes, measured himself, and chose what to keep. They caused him great pain, but for some reason he was unable to move past it in spite of the pain. It was his first home, and he was who he was because of everything that had happened to him. With a heavy sigh, he gathered the various garments into his arms and went to the register, where Mr. Summers was already present. "That was quick," said the man with the visor. He simply shrugged. He took his shopping very seriously because he had never had much money and everything he bought was necessary and practical. Just socks, boxers, shirts, shorts, and jeans. Mr. Summers said he would require a pair of regular shoes, but none were available. Though he did a good job of hiding it, He could see shock on the man's face at how simple his choice had been. He reflected on how the other genin had depended on mission earnings to pay for their pocket money. Ino and Sakura would use it to go shopping, while Choji would use it to buy more food. He never had enough money to do anything, much less have any money left over, because he lived off of it. Unaware that it might have caused trouble, he had considered creating a clone to carry his belongings, but he was momentarily preoccupied. Mr. Summers said, "Come on, I'll get us some coffee." He would soon discover that it was a bad move. In fact, the scent was quite, well, amazing. Additionally, he could smell it from a distance of several miles. Due to its strength, he had never actually needed it, so he had never tried it before. He was shocked to see that the majority of the people inside were at least slightly older than him. "What can I get for?" "Oh, hey, Mr. Summers." Naruto stopped his wandering gaze and turned to face the register, where he saw a blue-haired girl he recognized. "Hello." Nariko laid shift again. She let out a sigh knowing that the man liked his coffee with as few extras as possible. She said, "Yeah, I don't get off until closing, so, black with sugar." "Oh, hey Blondie, what about you?" she said, turning her head slightly. He twitched at the nickname, but he didn't notice the remark about his bright yellow hair. His gaze remained fixed on one item on the list. He asked naively, "What's espresso?" Unsure of why, Scott and Nariko both experienced chills. Watching it was incredibly unsettling, intriguing, and even a little scary. The blonde had already consumed 3 shots of espresso and 3 cups of coffee. If anything, he appeared bored. "No damn way," said Nariko in awe. "Language," a stern Scott corrected. Even so, he was taken aback. However, Hank had claimed that his metabolism was extremely high. He most likely just burned through all of the liquid caffeine. His focus shifted when the coffee shop patrons started whispering softly, "Whoa," and "Look at her skin," were among the mumbled words. He craned his neck to the front of the store and noticed Julian and Cecily, 2 other students from the school, had entered. To be clear, Naruto is a fool when it comes to women. We are all well aware of that fact, but he is not. Nariko grinned and hugged the drink tray to her apron front. "Hey, guys," she said. To be fair, the more feminine of the two was the main object of Naruto's attention. She was someone he had seen many times. She simply attracted his attention like a magnet, whether it was in the gym, the hallway, or anywhere else on campus. An attractive magnet. When Scott saw the distant expression in the boy's eyes, he couldn't resist smirking wryly and nudging the stunned blonde with his elbow. He recalled that expression for years. He had worn it himself. "Cecily, Julian," the man said, a little stiffly. It was instinctive. However, he felt that not using their last names was more forgiving than normal. "Mr. Summers," they both returned the greeting. 5 more minutes later, the adult with the sunglasses stood up. "I have to get back to the school. Could I ask you two to show Mr. Uzumaki around?" Cecily nudged him in the ribs with her elbow after Julian let out a low moan of frustration. "We'll do it, Mr. Summers," she replied on behalf of her teammate and friend. Julian and Cecily couldn't help but notice how the blonde adolescent was surveying her surroundings. The majority of newcomers would be twitching their heads. Julian was bored enough to ask a question that he probably wouldn't remember the answer to. "So why's Mr. Summers driving you around?" "Yeah, well, I've got no clothes, no money, and I don't want to be a burden on the school, so Miss Frost offered me a gig. I be Logan's assistant in his classes and I get paid clothes, books, etc., he said, scratching the back of his head, a nervous habit from years ago. In fact, Julian stopped mid-step. Naruto was stopped and turned to face them when Cecily grabbed him by the arm. He realized right away that they knew a lot more about Mr. Logan than he did from their shocked and incredulous expressions when he asked, "You're working for Mr. Logan?" "Yeah," he said plainly. Both of them were astonished. "The man's a sadist," Julian concluded. Meh. He was at a loss for words. It was accurate. "So far all we do is spar, and as fast as I heal, it's not as if I can get hurt." "So if you're his assistant, are you going to be teaching us?" Cecily responded. Julian appeared skeptical, but they both recalled his tale. "Maybe," he had a contemplative expression. "Don't know what I can teach you though." "Miss Frost must have a reason," she said with his arms folded and his head shaking in shock at their exchange. Julian snorted. "At least this explains why Logan was so pissed off the other night." Julian asked directly, "So you're not bullshitting about being a ninja?" "Is that so hard to believe?" Cecily, the epitome of innocence, shrugged her shoulders. "Well, you don't really look the part we kinda expected a ninja to be. I dunno, stealthy and serious, and stuff." He gave them a playful smirk in return. "I was never that type of shinobi for the most part, you're right, but I was never like that. They handled the stealthy, secretive stuff me. I specialized in doing things that didn't require subtlety. Point me at something and I get the job done. Finesse was never my weapon of choice. Usually he had been quite skilled at it at times. Can I ask something?" "What?" Cecily and Julian exchanged a look, with Cecily actually appearing slightly embarrassed. Well, what was with all the hostility? I mean, the other night when I went to get dinner, I thought someone was going to take a swing at me. Cecily said, recently, a lot of us lost our powers. The M-Day thing. Doc Strange mentioned it. Well, a lot of the people at the Institute lost their powers, and they might get sent home. Julian said, they don't have their powers, Cec, of course they're going home. Cecily gave him a glare in return. We don't know that, why would they stay? Xavier's is for mutants, which they aren't anymore. And Sophia? That stopped him. She turned back to Naruto, her eyes gleaming with pure sincerity as she let out a frustrated sigh at her friend and teammate. These are our friends. A few of us felt that any new mutants would be used to replace the ones that aren't mutants anymore. Ah, he was sufficiently aware of that. As they went on, silence fell upon them at last, the sun disappeared, and the town was engulfed in darkness. Julian finally turned to his watch. Geez, it's almost 9, he complained memorably. Nori should be off soon. We can get her on the way back, the metal girl said. Julian moaned but said nothing else, instead choosing to express his frustration by putting his hands in his pockets. Naruto leaned over to Cecily. Amused, she snorted, trying not to laugh, but she smiled at the blonde with the spiky hair. What? They used to date? She asked. 2 days later. Throughout William Stryker's speech, the scowl on his face grew. He said out loud that this was bad. How so? David inquired over the murmurs of the group. Look in his eyes. He believes, wholeheartedly, that God is behind him. That man is very dangerous. He's out of his gourd, sure, but that doesn't make him any less of a problem. Santo grunted, dude, serious much? But many of the others sensed that the blonde was telling the truth. He appeared almost insulted. Me? Serious? He asked, never that simple paranoia? The room fell silent as Jay said, but guys, what if he's right? What if all this really was an act of God? A miracle? Several icy looks were directed at the young man with red hair. Cecily appeared genuinely troubled. Miracle? You really think God decided to cripple mutants around the world? Oh, with the exception of us? She argued. Nice one, God, growled Santo. This guy is nuts, Jay. Josh continued the phrase. Don't drink the Kool-Aid. Is akin to cult nuts. Naruto grimly continued, sorry, Jay, but that's the wrong question to ask considering current company. Jay, however, was desperate to make his point. Look, can any of you honestly say that even for a moment, you didn't wish you'd lost your powers, too? It was an awful blow. That you didn't want to be normal? Maybe there was a reason we weren't chosen? During Josh's outburst, Naruto saw Cecily's face briefly marred by a pained wince. If this was such a beautiful damn miracle, then where's Jeffrey Garrett? Noriko jumped into the water. She was getting close to being indignant at what he was suggesting during her railing. She had been getting closer to the winged mutant. But David intervened before she could choke him. He's dead, Jay. Hydro's dead, too, and who knows how many more mutants are out there dead or dying right now, she said. Okay, everyone take a breath and calm down. No one knows why this happened. And right now we need to stick together, not attack each other, he said, turning to face Nori with beseeching eyes. What do you mean, we, human? Heads turned to see Julian leaning against the doorframe with a smug smile on his face while wearing his team uniform. I know it's hard to tell with you, but last time I checked, you as well, just became a part of them. The sheer abrasiveness of Keller's nature caused Naruto to mentally protest just, wow, and he had assumed that Kiba might be a jerk. Noriko growled, what the hell is your problem, Keller? Nori, it's okay. No, it's not. Julian's sneer changed to a tiny smile, but it was still arrogant. It's okay, because David knows that when we're all up against the wall, he'll be free and clear. That was an awful blow. Did he tell you about his little phone call with Harvard, yet? As Noriko turned to face her boyfriend, her rage was instantly replaced by shock. What? Nori, concluding his argument, he said, it's better this way. Ashita, he doesn't belong here or with you, not anymore. And why is that, Julian? Sophia's question seemed to cause him to stumble. It seemed that she had entered the room during his brief tirade against humans and had listened to everything he said. She had also lost her abilities and was returning home. Please, tell me, why is it better, Julian? Because David is human now. Are humans not worthy of being loved in your eyes? Sophia, it's not like that. You used to call me beautiful, am I less so now? Was the only response his mind could come up with. He had something to say, anything at all. But all that was heard was silence. She turned and walked off. Just stop, Julian, you're making fools of both of us. He called out to her as his brain was finally functioning well enough to realize she was leaving the room and probably the mansion. Sophia, wait. However, Nariko was far from done talking to them and planned to do so. With a simple shake of his head, Naruto left the room. He wasn't in the mood for any more drama at the moment. He'd had plenty already, but he would give Julian credit. His foot went up to his knee when he put it in his mouth. He halted when he smelled Logan approaching, followed by another scent that was similar. The unkempt man, wearing a strange black and yellow outfit, came around the corner in less than a second. He casually said, "Hey, Logan," as he saw the shadow of the Canadian. Wearing jeans, a t-shirt, a worn leather jacket, and a dark leather choker, she was at least half a head shorter than him and had dark hair. He could still see the faint indications that she was a fighter, even though she appeared a little uncertain of herself, more doubtful than lost. She had a dancer's gait, which is a sign of a fighter with skill despite his lack of taijutsu skills. The pervy sage taught him how to recognize fighters with ease. "Hey, kid," the disheveled man said sternly. "Stay in the room a little longer, would ya? Got an introduction to make." Naruto was once again astounded by Julian's complete lack of social skills and his conceit. He was not nearly as smooth as he believed himself to be. The angry telekinetic yelled, "What are you looking at, clone?" Naruto swung his hand out and flipped the teenager over. Looking at the recently introduced Laura, he said, "Don't be an ass, Julian. Don't mind him. While the sequoia up his ass seems normal enough for him, he's in a drama queen mood today," he said cheerfully. Julian gave him a gloomy look. The girl with dark hair gave him a blank stare in response. Unsure of how to respond, he said with a smile, "The name's Naruto," and then he left to find something to do, possibly even to nap. Sadly, that restful afternoon was not intended to be. Logan dragged him out of his room less than an hour later. To his surprise, Laura was also present when he entered the training room. "What's?" Before turning to face his clone, the hairy mutant growled, "On the mat, kid, it's been a while since I saw ya fight." Laura, "So, my training dumber, partner." "Yeah, partner, and you'll spar." Naruto was a little annoyed by the "training dummy" remark. The girl gave him a strange look, presumably wondering what made him eligible to train with Logan, but it was short-lived as she hurled herself at him, ejecting 2 claws from each hand. Oh, crap. It didn't take him long to realize that she had a distinct fighting style from Logan's. She moved from strike to strike with the grace of a dancer, swift and nimble. Initially, they simply played with one another, probing defenses and testing each other's strengths and weaknesses. It wasn't until Laura saw his bleeding forehead immediately meant that things became serious. The claws emerged. Each hand has 2 of them on each hand, one between the ring and pinky finger and the other between the pointer and middle finger. They were not as heavy as Logan's. Instead, they were graceful, slender blades. In any case, Naruto also needed to become more serious in order to avoid becoming cutlets. Snicked. Naruto froze in place. All right. He lost it right there before Laura was flung across the room and into the closest wall by a powerful fist. His eyes glowed with chakra that had been instinctively channeled. And that was it. When someone attempted to neuter him, he drew the line. Sheathing her blades in his palm, he was able to deflect the claw with an open hand, even though it had been extremely close. Laura got up, shook off the shock of the force he'd used, and ran back across to him before launching herself at him again, claws ready, eyes blazing. Fortunately, Logan sensed that it was time to intervene. Before they really got into a fight, he didn't want to listen to the Ice Queen whine. "All right, that's no," he snarled, his strong arm lifting Laura while Naruto crouched in anticipation of the blow. Laura calmed down almost instantly, but it took Naruto nearly a full minute to subdue the chakra's surge. Laura landed lightly on her toes as Logan released his hold. She was giving the blonde a strange, approving look. Logan was scratching at his rough, stubby chin, too. "Just what was that, kid?" He got back up, at last acknowledging that the fight was over for the time being. "What?" he asked, casting a curious glance back at the man, still cautious. Logan gave a scowl. "That you've never done that fightin' with me." Naruto had a slightly sheepish expression. Logan gritted his teeth and said, "That was my chakra. I used it to boost my strength for a moment. Didn't you read my file?" Logan appeared increasingly sullen throughout. "I didn't use it in our fights 'cause you always went easy on me." She tried to castrate me. Oh, he didn't like that look at all. "You and me, kid, right now anything goes," he said, his dark eyes shining and his savage smile taking over the middle of the sparring mat. Naruto swallowed. Being correct was something he detested, particularly when standing up meant that you might get a slap in the face. "Even I have my limits." "Absolutely not." Emma glared at Scott across the desk as small fists pounded the wooden desk. "She's killed hundreds of people without regret. It took time, But I've finally pierced X-23's mental shield's. Death is all she knows, she said, glaring at Scott with her most ominous expression. She even killed her own mother. Scott, however, was more than prepared for her. Logan vouches for her, whether asked or not. It took a lot to win the tough man's approval. That doesn't exactly help your case, Scott, she retorted. With everything that he's done recently, I don't think he should be around the kids either. A frown creased behind Cyclops' visor. He knew the X-Man in question, but he could understand her point. The fundamental problems, that is without a doubt. Logan was among the best of them, responding. Logan is an X-Man. Emma, he's saved both our lives. Time and time again he vouches for her, just like Professor Xavier vouched for you. That's good enough for me. Scott, the children have enough dangers facing them outside the walls of this school. The last thing we need to do is bring more inside. He clenched his teeth, leaned in a hostile position, and pointed fingers while standing in an unwelcoming manner. Emma, I stood by you when you let Danielle go, and I'm willing to stand by this new training system. But he made his way out. In the White Queen, something changed. There was something about the way he looked at her. Perhaps she had gone a bit too far. Scott. His ruby-lensed visor flashed backward. Emma, that's enough. X-23 stays. End of discussion. Emma scowled. She detested losing an argument, but she also detested making someone she loved angry in the upcoming nights. It would definitely be uncomfortable. This was a battle of endurance rather than skill. The person with the greatest endurance would ultimately prevail, even though each of them could deliver a blow that was not fatal. This would be a brief altercation based on who was winded the fastest, but a real fight could last for hours or even days. With his chakra and strong, albeit limited, jutsu, it was possible to think that he had an advantage. Sadly, Logan was a typical beast in a battle. With countless years of experience, he was fierce, accurate, and absolutely terrifying. Oh no. Logan had previously been acting very evasively. If he hadn't been using his chakra to strengthen his body, his left cross, with its metal-encased bones, would have easily broken his jaw. Even though it had broken and he had lost a few teeth, presumably molars, it quickly recovered and the teeth grew back. He substituted himself with a shadow clone that had survived, and he briefly caught the claw wielder off guard by driving his open hand into his stomach. More accurately, he forced the object in his hand into his stomach. Logan's shirt tore from the swirling ball of energy as he was flung hard into the wall, leaving a faint impression. He dropped to one knee, coughed up some blood, and then smiled toothily. This young man was cunning in the past. He kept many of his skills hidden until the appropriate moment. The child was still guessing, if he had to. In addition, he was tough. In addition to the fact that he was doing well, he had lost a lot of skin thus far, including several fingers and nearly his entire left hand, and he hadn't complained. It required courage, and the force of that last attack had caused his organs to shred. He would reluctantly acknowledge that he had misjudged him. He admired the boy and felt sorry for him because of his cunning that was only the result of a difficult life. He acknowledged gratefully that, those clones of yours are pretty handy in a brawl. Naruto straightened up and took a deep, soothing breath. If I have a moment to concentrate, or if I'm really pushed, I can trade places with them. Like you did earlier. Didn't think I noticed? Unha. Logan gave a dramatic roll of his neck. Good, I'd hate for you to make it too easy for me. The elevated observation area. Hank McCoy was fascinated by the fight. Logan was expected to be completed over an hour ago when he discovered him still in the gym. He was pleasantly surprised. He was finally given the chance to witness the young, blonde teen Naruto in scenarios where he practically applied his abilities, which was a pleasant surprise. He jotted down important points about his fighting skills, stress tolerance, and those amazing chakra-using abilities on his pad. He needed the boy to write down these skills and techniques. Logan finally called it quits after 5 hours. He spoke with ease and showed no signs of fatigue. All right, kid, that's... No, he said. On the other hand, Naruto was exactly the same as him. His new attire was identical to Logan's, with bloodstains and tears all over it. Laura had watched the entire epic battle from the sidelines. Motionless, the blonde teenager was good. She would concede his fighting abilities, healing abilities, and instincts are all very good, albeit a little crude. The hairy X-Man had been questioning him about his skills and evaluating their battle when a well-known but unfamiliar word reappeared. What's that? Logan hesitated. The danger room indicated Naruto. I've heard some of the students mention it. Logan's smile became toothy and broad after responding negatively. Naruto shook his head in confusion. That's right, y'all haven't been yet, have y'all? You'll see? That smirk did not sit well with him. He quickly discovered that a grinning Logan meant interesting, which consequently promised suffering. Laura said, "You fight well," in a flat voice, not that he was aware of any other tones in her. Logan nodded briefly, as though both were the most valuable evaluations. He went on to say, well, not bad, better, and I thought you were. This is a rare compliment. If only he were aware. Got no style, but ya know how to fight at least. What do we do about, he said, jerking his thumb to the various bits of skin scattered throughout the training room, some of which were larger than others. Logan simply shrugged, showing little concern. His stomach rumbled at the mere mention of a meal. No, get it later, come on. Supper's already started. Need to hurry if you want to get something to eat. The healing really works up the appetite. Logan retorted, Nuha, kid, and grabbed him by the collar before he could get away. One last thing, Hank wants you to write down all the things you can do, and I agree with, I am. Laura and a dozen other students vanished during the evening meal, which was as late as they had arrived. Notably, the teams he had previously encountered, they were known as the Hellions and the New Mutants. Yes, in the half hour that followed, the power flickered menacingly. 9:30 p.m. After finishing his jog, he reclined in the grass outside. He hummed to himself, his eyelids drooping sleepily. The enormous metal titans were relatively easy to ignore once he got used to them. The students claimed that they only moved or spoke when someone showed them hostility. His languid mood was reflected in the low, haphazard tune that rumbled from his throat. He felt as though he was back in the elementals as he stared at the moon, but he hadn't yet completely detested her. Everything works out in due time. Hey, he asked, cocking his head back to see Cecily approaching him across the lawn. He made an effort to ignore the fact that she had a bare midriff and was wearing skin-tight shorts and a top. He had to admit that she was very captivating in the moonlight, but he kept his thoughts to himself. He gave himself a mental slap. This was no time for romanticism, particularly since she had no knowledge of him. He greeted her from his upside-down position. Hun? Oh, hey, Cecily, as she stopped with a worried look on her face. With concern in her voice, she said, yeah, listen, I was wondering if you've seen Kevin around? Kevin? He asked, mentally reviewing the individuals he had already encountered. An apologetic, oh, him nope, sorry, was his response. She sagged dejectedly, her shoulders clearly deflated. Nothing. Nobody was aware of Kevin's whereabouts. Asked, want help? She gave a headshake. Sure. I'm a fair tracker. I'll ask Miss Frost, she said, turning away. No, that's all right. Did you want to be one of the ones to lose your power, Cecily? He asked abruptly. Before she could go, she stopped walking. Come on, sit down, he said to her. She initially shuffled her bare silver feet as if she wanted to return inside. She made her decision and padded across the few feet of grass between them to sit next to the blonde who was relaxing and who had decided to sit up at that precise moment. I wanted to ask earlier, I don't want to be rude, but every time someone brings up M-Day, you look really depressed. She said, I'm covered in inorganic, non-toxic mercury. Following a brief pause, I don't need to breathe or eat. Yuhun, he said, his face expressionless. So? She became agitated. Look at me. She growled. Was he a moron? Her arms were extended, then reshaped into different shapes. All I wanted was a normal life, and I get this, she was saying. I'm like the Terminator from the second movie. He cocked his head to the side and gave a bewildered look in return. She blinked and looked at him as if he were blind, asking, but how is all that bad? His naive misinterpretation caused her to lose some of her confidence. He wasn't at fault. After all, pulling her knees to her chest, she appeared to shrink into herself. When I woke up on that day, hearing so many of the others screaming about how their abilities were gone, I ran to the mirror, wishing it was true for me as well. And when I saw me, all I could do was stare and ask why it couldn't have been the same for me. It's not just about appearance, is it? He inquired. She stiffened. He wasn't making a sexual move when he said, I don't know what my opinion's worth, but you seem pretty to me. He saw no harm in sharing the straightforward opinion. A stunned, quiet Naruto sighed and turned back to the sky. She glanced at him, wondering where he was going with this. People always hate and fear what they don't understand. I've seen enough of that, but I pity them. He gazed at her with sad but sympathetic eyes and said, I can do things that they could never understand or imagine. They will never understand the joy of what I can do, or of seeing things as I see them. I was always told that I was a good judge when it came to people, even if I'm a little optimistic. What I see is a pretty girl with a beautiful soul when you look in the mirror. Can't you see the same? He asked before turning his gaze back to the sky. Cecily fell into a deep, engulfing coma. She had to acknowledge that his remarks had been both heartfelt and flattering. She was positive her blush would have glowed in the dark if she had had the blood to do so. He repeated, Are you sure you don't want any help? No, that's okay. She slipped to her feet and headed for the common building, shaking her head in an attempt to dispel it. But before she could go any farther, she turned to face the blonde adolescent again. Her eyes full of gratitude, she said, Thank you. In a whisper, however, The least of the emotions she was feeling at the time was gratitude. It was peculiar. He was a cheerful, laid-back man. Based on what she had seen of him, there was nothing wrong with that, but he was a bit of a goofball. So where did this somber side originate? For the blonde, it was one of the few times she had clarity. It's not that he knew enough about women to realize the implications of what he said, and it's also not that he would change his mind if he did. He was a little depressed as he watched her go. Seeing other people sad had never pleased him. 10 p.m. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. The Muslim student, alone in her room, kneeled and chanted a silent evening prayer. Ashhadu Allah ilaha illallah ashha. However, the brief quiet she had was interrupted by two forceful knocks on her door. The headmaster stepped just over the threshold as the door opened in response to a prompt. He started off by saying, "I'm sorry, Soraya, I didn't mean to interrupt," as best he could. For the moment, though, she had no animosity toward him. "How may I help you, Mr. Summers?" After Nori requested to room alone, "I thought you might like some company," he said, waiting for a negative response before continuing, his kind smile as firmly affixed as ever. "And, well, Laura needs a roommate, someone who wouldn't mind showing her around," he said, providing a clear explanation for the young woman behind him who appeared uncomfortable. Accepting with a bow of her head, she said, "I would be honored." He bid them both a good night before departing, ushering the silent girl, who was also a former killer, in. It was one of the few times she had spoken since coming, and it wasn't a question. "You are Sunni?" Surprised, Soraya blanched. Yes, forgive me. I did not realize you spoke. You were familiar with my home?" "Clearly, yes, I have killed in Afghanistan." Awkward. For the umpteenth time in the past hour, he threw off his sheets and gave the alarm clock a death glare. It appeared to taunt him as it flashed 1 a.m. in vivid, glowing green. He didn't really need much sleep in the first place, but there were moments when he wished he could go to bed like everyone else. He sat up and looked out his window at the peaceful campus, sighing in exasperation. He needed to clear his head, get his blood flowing, and do something. After a minute, wearing only a t-shirt and a pair of light shorts, he slipped out his window. He landed soundlessly on the soft grass below, but the nearest sentinel's eyes were on him instantly. He called hoarsely, "Jog," so as not to wake anyone. He ignored them since the machine continued to watch him inertly without taking any action. The weather was pleasant. The night air was sweet and crisp, and the moon shone brightly. He walked quickly and barefoot, making his way around the rather large property. Yes, he couldn't go all out while everyone was watching, but he would take what he could. In addition to that, it allowed him to get his thoughts straight. "Do we need to notify the command?" called the other two sentinel pilots and asked McGivens questions. Bertowski snorted at the novice's query and turned to a different section of the newspaper he was reading. "If he's not blowing shit up, leave. I am alone," he growled. "Submit a report, nothing more." "Is the sports section available to me?" Gordon yelled over the comm. "Shut up, you two," questioning why he was forced to work this shift. On Saturday. For the second time, or perhaps the third, he said to no one in particular, "I don't get it, what's the big deal?" Because they had dragged him away from lunch, he was a little hesitant to simply follow their lead. "Logan's here today," Julian complained. The weekend had just begun. Although there were some extracurricular activities, he had been informed that there were no classes on those days and that students typically spent their time on their own. As students who still lacked sufficient mastery over their projectile skills practiced, the target range began to show some signs of life. Indifferently blinking, "And that's different, how?" With a craggy grin, Santo laughed heartily. "It means we get to tear up the danger room, porco sweet, huh?" He leaned over and whispered to Cecily, ignoring the jab, and Cecily blushed slightly at the proximity, even though he didn't notice it. "Did you find Kevin?" The brunette's face collapsed. "No, I went to Miss Frost, but she was too busy. She did a psychic scan of the campus and the town, but he wasn't there." "Sue, what's the danger room?" "Everyone seems to know, but no one's told me anything remotely helpful," he said, taking the cue that it was a sensitive topic. Julian exchanged a glance with Santo and grinned broadly. "Let's just say, it's good you're wearing something durable." Cecily gave the two a sidelong glance. How immature they could be. "They not give you a uniform yet?" Santo growled, demonstrating that he was aware of the situation. He had not yet been spotted wearing the school uniform, which implied that he had not yet acquired one, and he had been right to guess so. Uniform? No, although he had observed their attire, he had never been told that he would receive one. The majority of them wore tight red or gold clothing that seemed to be more for mobility than complete protection. However, he observed that some of them were more unique than others. Julian wore an undersized red jacket, while Noriko's was balanced by a pair of loose-fitting jeans. Laura didn't appear to have a uniform like he did. but her clothing was sturdy enough to accomplish the same thing. His open admiration for Cecily had to be restrained. Hers was a red top with white emblazoned markings and a low-riding pair of tight pants. She looked good in red, which wasn't his favorite color. When Soraya said, "It could be assumed that the faculty is waiting for more information regarding your abilities before giving you a uniform," she was from the rear. Her purpose was to boost team morale, not to partake in the day's fun. "This is a big round room." His expression of amazement caused some of the others, especially Santo, to giggle in anticipation of witnessing the newcomer get creamed. He only had a pair of jeans and a t-shirt, the most durable, affordable clothing he could find, because his shinobi gear was still filthy from his blood-stained spar with Logan and Laura. Nevertheless, he fervently hoped they would not be destroyed. He had secured his soles and wrapped the calves down to his ankles out of a learned habit. Luckily, despite their age, his boots had not failed him yet, so what's the big deal about a big round room? Santo smirked and crossed his arms. "Just you wait, man, this is the best place to tear crap up," he extolled, rubbing his enormous stone hands together with a childlike eagerness. In actuality, he excelled at that specific activity. "It's more than that," Cecily clarified for her teammates, who were ecstatic. He gazed at her as if she had just said something foolish, his massive stone arms folded across his chest. "It's all that really counts," he shot back. "The danger room is a simulator," Soraya explained. The blonde's eyes widened as she said, "Through it, we're taught how to handle certain situations." The why was pretty exciting, even though he didn't understand the how. Logan's words, "Come on, kiddies," reverberated throughout the space. "Where?" Cecily tapped him on the shoulder after he asked this question. "Up there," she said, gesturing upward. The way Julian and Santo were giggling at him bothered her. She therefore felt sorry for him, or at least she gave herself that explanation. He looked back and saw a big window with a view of the cylindrical room. Logan's voice echoed through the room, "Let's go." "Move it, once more, Evers first, just stay behind." "Now what?" Logan's grin widened to the point of being almost cruelly playful. The display in front of him was covered in buttons that said, "Watch close." After a moment, the room below started to hum. He whispered, "Get ready, crush and run," over the PA. Almost simultaneously, spectral shapes began to take shape around Santo, growing more distinct by the second. Before long, he was encircled by anonymous adversaries. The blonde with the spiky hair watched with a mixture of curiosity and bewilderment as she leaned against the glass. The purpose of the room became apparent as the rock team began to attack the phony individuals. Cecily crossed her arms over her chest and walked across from him. Santo was the best at this kind of thing. He was proud to be aware of this. He used the danger room to demonstrate his fighting skills, even though they all thought it was entertaining, if exhausting at times. "It's a simulator," she clarified. "During classes, the professor will set a program and we have to accomplish an objective." The blue eyes sparkled. "Yeah, I get it, a sort of dry run for future missions." She hummed as she observed her teammate being destroyed, "And on our off days, Mr. Logan lets us use it." "That I can see," he said, watching the melee battle intently. One of his opponents was thrown into two of the others by Santo. The targets dissipated and were replaced as soon as they were struck with a significant amount of force similar to his shadow clones. Incredibly powerful stone limb projectiles, rock slide, change onyx, or brute strength change. Helion telekinesis change explosions of electricity, surge. Change swiftness and accurate claw strikes, X-23. Change changing forms and creating weapons out of body parts, Mercury. They took turns one after the other because of the incredible things he witnessed and his fear of missing anything. He hardly blinked during the entire event. He whispered to himself, "Sweet," as he saw Cecily transform her arm into a scythe-like blade and cut an assailant from stem to stern. He was amazed at how fluid she could be. She had such grace. "Kid, you're up, huh?" he asked as he snapped out of his reverie and turned to see Mercury leaving the cleared floor. Logan urged, amused, "Get movin'." He hardly heard what Santo and Julian were saying as the door closed behind him. "Bets." Logan suppressed a snort of laughter at the little wagers that were made between the students in attendance. He'd fought the child, but what better way to teach them about the risks of gambling? "I'll take some of that action." And he felt comfortable taking advantage of their ignorance because he knew he was capable. He would have enough for a beer or two, if he was lucky. Teach him a lesson not to gamble. Passing the redhead, they shared a fleeting moment of eye contact. You fought good," he said feebly. He had never really been good with women. According to him, although he hadn't believed him, Jiraiya had frequently said that the teenager had a natural charm. She quickly looked away, yanking a stray hair from her face out of some unconscious insecurity, and said, Thanks, good luck." she muttered behind her as she continued toward the observation area, unsure of why she was saying it. Questioning blue eyes going up to where he knew the observation room was. So, what do I do? There was a moment of silence before Logan's voice came through over the PA. "Ya gotta beat your opponents, kid," the hairy X-Man answered. Then nothing, no time limit, no holds barred. Well, that was pretty simple, I shrugged in my head. Okay, then. Julian and Santo sniggered at the teen below 5 minutes. They'd be lucky if he didn't need to be helped to the infirmary. Hiding his knowing smirk, Logan entered the simulation. He'd seen the kid in a one-on-one fight. Let's see how he dealt with numbers. Nori rolled her eyes as she saw the title of the simulation on the screen. Too much irony? Just as he'd seen with the others, all around him figures coalesced. Each of the teens had been given a standard simulation with varying levels by his best guess, but he almost immediately picked up on the slight difference in his opponents. They were shinobi? Laura and Logan observed in silence. They were the only ones in the room who recognized the exercise's deeper significance for the other teens. This was training, or even a way to blow off steam, but for them it was another test of the blonde's capabilities in a fight, and even though the projections were merely imitations, both recognized their danger. The hand the local ninjas, Naruto wondered, "You're kidding me, right?" As he looked toward the quiet, inaudible control room, it was somewhat sentimental. Was this what Logan thought was funny? He was surrounded by seemingly identical ninja dressed in stealth on all sides. The outfits were a little strange, but it was obvious they carried a variety of weapons, nearly all of which were katanas. Fine, he sighed, his loose posture contrasting with his taut muscles. The imposter ninja pulled out their weapons, but he had already left. He blurred into invisibility as soon as they began to move. When he reappeared, he struck one unfortunate shinobi with his fist. It was strange, very strange. His shadow clones weren't all that different, but that was chakra hitting something like this, something that had appeared as if from the air itself, and running into resistance. Solidity. This was a little difficult for him to comprehend. He was aware of his predicament, though, and he avoided the blades that were aimed at him despite not having known Logan as long as the others. He was aware of him based on what he had learned. The safety features that he had witnessed preventing the others' injuries were not working. It wasn't because he was a healer, it was courteous in a professional manner. With his feet gripping the floor plating with chakra, he bent back more than 90 degrees and narrowly avoided one of the shinobi's horizontal stabs. As others exploited the gap he created, he followed through, twisting, hardening, and throwing himself into the air and away. It was becoming enjoyable, interesting. Despite his own unpredictability, he already knew what his clones would do, since it was what he would do if he were in their shoes. These were new, unidentified attackers, a fresh challenge. Most people watching the fight would be surprised to learn that his heart rate was still significantly lower than it would be under normal circumstances. He had been fighting all his life, knowingly or unknowingly. He was a fighting machine because of his battles for survival, protection, and transformation. His reflexes, instincts, and body were all refined and tuned to his survival. In midair, he flipped over another ninja and barely avoided being cleaved. He grabbed the fake ninja by the shoulders and used its weight to pull him back down before mercilessly tossing him, whatever it was, back into its fellow comrades. The structure was destroyed by the impact's force, but several others were thrown into the metal walls. However, they stood up again to remain down. They had to be destroyed or rendered totally inoperable. Sufficient defense. He used his twisting motion to backhand a ninja who was approaching, bending at the waist and planting his boot in their face. He continued to gain momentum as he rolled on his axis, bringing his resting leg all the way up to 270 degrees before landing on an opponent's head. They were already exploiting his immobility by this time. He moved through a wheat field like a scythe. The blonde asked over the phone, "Is this some kinda joke?" They all witnessed the battle from above, where they saw him standing over the other hands, who had vanished from view in their defeated states. He would likely recall how clumsy and cocky he had been in his early years if he could see their faces. Though he had made progress, he was aware that he was far from refined. Dealing with 20 hand had only taken a minute or two given the times he'd fought them and the consequences of losing to them. It was one of Logan's favorite sparring programs. With a sly smile, Logan lightly touched the console, pressing a button. The file was saved to the mansion systems, and the monitoring system was turned off. Hank might stop bugging him about his skills now. In relation to that, he moved quickly even after he had declared he was no longer holding back. He was faster than he had been during their sparring. He could handle it, but it was annoying. He quickly realized that the safety procedures were being silently disabled as if he had left them on. He knew he could handle it because he had fought the child well, he was pretty sure. There's no need to worry, he would live in any case. It was remarkable for a child that made him frown inwardly. It took some sort of conditioning to fight the way he did, the sort that seemed to know death well. His regard for the child increased slightly, even if covertly. In addition to that, He only had a few minor cuts on his jawbone and limbs. They all recovered. Not bad, kid, he called over to the father. I've seen better, but not bad. He didn't need to boast. The arrogant X-Man had waved him over as soon as he entered the building and shoved a few bills into his hand without any formalities. What's this? That's your cut, kid. The blonde cocked an eyebrow, paused, shook his head, and stuffed the money into his pocket while glancing at a few silently angry teenagers and trying not to smile too much at their expense, which it actually was. Like the others, Julian and Santo had to respect the blonde's talent even though they lost some pocket money. If he claimed not to have seen this specific grenade coming his way, he would be lying. The Ice Queen had not approved the training sim, which had been an unofficial test. He was a little shocked that she hadn't hit him with a psychic whammy, yet most likely, being around witnesses stopped that. Seldom. The majority of the other faculty members were currently gathered around him: Pete, Hank, Slim, and the Ice Queen herself. Emma growled, "You disabled the safety protocols," for the third or fourth time in less than 2 minutes after he had given his explanation to show the leaked video. The interested faculty had convened in Hank's lab for a small meeting that didn't require a lot of privacy. In addition to showcasing his skill, it also served as proof that he had disabled the safeties, which was incriminating. Kurt was unable to contribute because he had left campus for a mission. The others gathered around the furry scientist as he sat in front of the console. Scott's position at Hank's side allowed him to see the video file clearly and was also close enough to hear any thoughts his seated colleague and friend might be having. His counterpart, Emma, was tapping her foot while glaring fearfully at the clawed Canadian, in stark contrast to his patient demeanor. "Emma's right, Logan, you should have cleared it." He shrugged, glancing languidly at the headmaster. Peter nodded next to him and much higher up, saying, "I knew the kid could handle it." His judgment was amply supported by the video. Emma sniffed mockingly. "So now you're the psychic?" Aside from her complaint about Logan's illegal behavior, she struggled to keep her glare going due to the distraction of the video being shown in public. There was more going on than she could see from Hank's irate mutterings and note-taking. "He's doing well," Scott said with admiration. "What's your take on him so far?" Logan, as tough as ever, said. Kid hides it. As he watched the blonde defeat multiple hand ninja in the video, he saw one of his own motions in the child's movements once or twice. After only a dozen or so spars, he had already begun learning some new techniques. His quick learning and application of a move was evidence of his fighting prowess. Scott remained silent, but he heard everything. He's got a lot of power. In order to watch the video's highlights, the conversation stopped. "Kid needs a name," Logan added, sneaking the topic into the conversation. Emma huffed silently, her face contorted. There wasn't much to argue about, but she made a lot of money over it despite its extremeness. He had achieved results, and maybe now Hank would stop nagging about the boy's skills all the time. The fuzzy mutant had only become more desperate to view said abilities after the blonde teen gave him a rough list. "A uniform as well," she confessed reluctantly. Hank idly added, "I'll come up with some options," barely noticing them as he scrawled angrily. In this case, he would have preferred to test the boy's biometrics, but at least this provided some information about his purely physical abilities. With some disappointment, he added, "It's a shame he never used any of his techniques, compared to other students." His records of the blonde were far less complete, which greatly annoyed him. His file was filled with holes that piqued his interest. His meticulous records were a source of professional pride, but the gaps were understandable. As a side note, "I commend you on your choice." Quite ironic. His eyes pierced his palm almost completely. Oh no. The moon was visible, but it was only faintly visible in the overcast night sky. However, there was just enough light to make the golden spikes that were shaggy gleam. On his first day, creating that Rasengan required more concentration than usual, and now I'm attempting to make the swirling ball in a casual manner. It felt like his chakra was denser. It would take some getting used to and adjusting to this. Additionally, Sage Mode was a significant loss. He discovered that even though he had enough nature chakra to start the transformation, he was unable to maintain it outside of meditation. This world's nature chakra seemed to be fainter and thinner than the elementals. It actually kind of made sense. With one hand, give, and with the other, take. He had nearly lost it after all the training and peril he had endured. Discuss getting the shaft. Sad eyes gazed into emptiness in the common room's darkness. Under the surface, there was a lot of conflict. Was everything real? She had been troubled by a lot of what had been said for a while. Laura, the girl with the dark hair, tensed up at being taken by surprise, instinctively drawing the blades from her left fist. He had stopped just outside the doorway, his progress halted by her presence. Blue eyes gleamed through the muck and darkness. A towel slung over his shoulder, and he was covered in dirt and grime. However, because of their improved senses, neither was particularly affected by the extremely bad lighting. He could therefore see the faint hesitancy in her green eyes as she saw his filthy condition. "What's wrong?" She didn't know how to respond to that query even though this had nothing to do with him overall. He would probably not put up with her silence. Nightmare. She clarified it was straightforward and contained just enough truth to appear to be true again. He didn't care about this regretfully. He refused to let it go. He walked over and sat down beside her, nodding. "Want to talk about it?" he asked, wiping some of the gunk from his face with the towel. Given the slim likelihood that he would leave, she gave in to a minor distraction, even if it was still related to her issue. "You have received training?" A smile. "Training in killing?" Another nod. He nodded, but his response was a little slow. "And you have taken life?" They sat silently together. "Don't let it consume you," he suddenly said, as was quite usual. She looked at him with an emotionless gaze, but his own eyes were sad. Jiraiya had once told him, "Believe in yourself, that you can be something better. That's all the advice I can offer. You never got anywhere by doubting yourself." "I don't get it. It's literature. I still don't get it." Josh clenched the bridge of his nose in an attempt to suppress the migraine that had unexpectedly surfaced. "Just read it." Things settled down for a few days. Many were depressed by the sad departures of depowered students, who were departing in large numbers. However, there were still times when the sadness was replaced by other emotions. For example, when Josh offered to teach Naruto about Romeo and Juliet for their class, the blonde was unable to stop denying it, saying that if he were Romeo, he would be kicking ass until only he and Juliet remained. Cecily had wanted to intervene, but after observing the situation, she concluded that it would be best for her temper if she didn't. Santo laughed until he was on the verge of tears. The others simply hung their heads in silence, feeling sorry for the young person with the gold skin who had attempted to impose culture on the ninja by chance of being in the same class. Lost cause. Emma paced back and forth steadily. The co-head of the school grimaced behind his desk, saying, "I can't find him anywhere. Scott." For their kind, the times had become even more dangerous. Initially, Kevin Ford had vanished, and now, under their supervision, Jay Guthrie, their own younger brother, had virtually vanished. "And you've searched the city?" "Of course," she said with a sigh. "Really, Scott, dear, who do you take me for?" He had no intention of telling Sam that his younger brother was missing today, so he ignored her playful remark. "It's only been a few hours. Ask his teammates if they've heard from him. I'll tell Cannonball." They certainly didn't need this at the moment. What was happening? Logan announced at the conclusion of their most recent afternoon spar that he would at last be assisting in the classroom, whether it was for effect or not. The menacing laugh made him question. Again, damn that man, he merely used him as a visual aid. The rough Canadian worked him over for the first 10 minutes, showing the curious students a few moves. For the most part, it meant allowing him to beat him. It was a living, huh? He then created a dozen clones for each student to practice against. Under Logan's guidance, he saw some of them being destroyed. Gratuitously, in a few cases they had to be reminded repeatedly not to use their powers because Santo and Julian appeared to take great pleasure in flattening them. His clones did not simply loiter. Logan ordered his clones to attack in ways that could only be repelled by the moves they had been taught. However, during the final 20 minutes of the lesson, the roles were reversed. Logan allowed him to use his clones as he pleased. He clarified, "Downside of the danger rooms, it anticipates you, attacks your weak spots." While they engaged in combat with their arms crossed, he said, "I don't care what anyone else says, there's nothing better in fighting a real flesh and blood opponent." Although he enjoyed the danger room, there was still a difference between a person and a computer, no matter how sophisticated. However, Naruto had no desire to address that disagreement. Actually, his clones lacked any flash and blood elements. However, he wasn't in the mood to bring up that point at the moment. In fact, the girls performed best when they were hand-to-hand. Laura clearly had the upper hand ultimately. She had almost 10 years of combat experience, more than any of them. Noriko was another. Although she had received some training, he could tell from personal experience that she had learned most of what she knew on the street. She was skilled at dirty fighting. Cecily was the most defensive by far. She would automatically move to avoid his attacks by using her physiology. Her offense was a little lacking, but if he had to guess, he assumed it was because she was accustomed to using blades in combat, even if they were made from her own arms. Even Hisako, whom he had just met, was formidable in a fistfight, even though she relied on her mutation and he was only able to identify those by name. The majority of the guys appeared to have relied on their skills. Julian's reaction times were slow, but he appeared fit. Josh also lacked the motivation to engage in serious combat. The movements of the golden boy resembled a child yelling he used to win when he rushed in, at least, but this kid was too impulsive to even think about it, and he lacked discipline. Santo and Onyx, whose name he had not yet learned, both attempted to win by using their size and sheer strength. He moaned and rubbed his closed eyes. He gave a feeble glare in return. "So what do you think?" Logan gave a grateful snort and asked, "My opinion as a ninja, or impartial?" What wasn't being said was immediately clear to him. His professional background and upbringing gave him a perspective that was similar to his own. Cecily had been waiting for him. Leaning against the wall near the metal door, he said, "Oh, hey, Cecily." With a smile, she appeared to be the friendliest of all the students he had actually met. When it came to making amends, it was a metaphor he had read about only recently, but he had quickly come to like her. "Hi," she said, her movements uncertain and, dare he say it, twitchy. "I was wondering, do you, want to grab some lunch?" she said. Head cocked, sure. His stomach gave a fierce growl, as though to add a vote of its own. "Why do you always eat outside?" After giving it some thought, he shrugged and swallowed the substantial portion of his turkey club on whole wheat with all the toppings. "Don't know at first, it was because I wasn't feeling very welcome here." He waved it off, saying, "Sorry." Heck, he doubted that he or Sakura would have ever accepted Sai if it weren't for Yamato, ruling out the possibility of killing him on that first mission. "No, it's okay, I've been there. I'm trying to get used to it all. I guess I'm still not really used to all this." He sighed, pointing with his drink-filled hand around him. "I think part of me's waiting to wake up and be right back there having the life sucked out of me," he joked. "So, you know a little about me. What about you?" "Me?" she inquired uneasily. She hadn't had much success with the type of conversational boundary that hung between friends and couples, but this was getting uncannily close. He raised an eyebrow and grinned to himself. It was just he had revealed a good deal about his life. It's time for some compensation. "Yeah, how's life been treating you?" Hearing about such a normal life was intriguing. That's what he thought it was. Anyway, the students here led far more normal lives than he had. Even by his own standards, he pondered idly what life might have been like if the conflicts had ended there. Would her description of her life here be comparable? However, he could actually feel sorry for her. Nothing compares to getting unexpected, life-altering shit thrown at you. She turned to face him hesitantly and said, "Hey." She stopped herself from biting her lip almost immediately after it began. He had only spoken after she had taken a few steps away from him. With an uncertain tone, he suggested, "You want to do this again?" Eating with someone had been a pleasant change. There were very few people who had done so back home. "Sure," she said hastily before making her way back. She thought her smile was almost too big the entire time. He genuinely seemed interested in her, unlike Kevin, but she had no idea where this would go. She was rewarded with the final glimpse of him sitting on the bench with his eyes closed as she walked through the doors. Even with his intense blue eyes covered, she was drawn to him. He appeared so calm, a paradox from some of his occasional bursts of vigor. Regretfully, the relative high that each of them felt from their shared meal was quickly forgotten in favor of more urgent issues in the days that followed. Naruto staggered from his bed somewhere along the line. He had fallen asleep while reading late. He was late. The next thing he knew, he was literally falling out of bed due to a loud knock on his door. Logan yelled, "Hurry up, kid!" With a sharp edge that even his sleep-deprived brain could hear. He glanced at his clock and saw that he had the morning off from classes, and it wasn't even 9 yet. What on earth was the stubborn switchblade doing knocking on his door at this early hour? So early on. It had better not be another spar. His fingers were still tingling from the fight with him the night before. Logan wasn't feeling patient, and he never was. As he reached for the knob, a characteristic sound came from the door's opposite side, a tense sound that caused him to yank his hand away. A boot came after the knob's retraction, and a metal claw cut around it. Less than a second later, the door flew open. As concerned as he was about Logan's sudden arrival, Naruto became even more alarmed by the man's agitated expression. After saying, "Get dressed and get downstairs now," he left. He felt a chill run through him. Yes, there was a serious problem. On the first floor, he reconnected with Logan. He was dressed in a new gray t-shirt, boots, and one of his more worn-out pairs of jeans. As they walked, the Canadian swore and shoved something into his hand. "Here, put this on her belt," he said. He held it up and saw that it was the same X symbol that was on the clothing of everyone else. The red X on his dark pants stood out as he reached down and clipped it onto his hip. Right next to his pocket. They rode in silence as they entered the elevator to the lower levels, but the tension was easily thick enough to give him anxiety. A few seconds later, the elevator stopped, and he was greeted by the sight of all the senior X-Men assembled in front of the Blackbird, all of them wearing equally solemn expressions. "Good," said Cyclops. "Let's go." Even though Miss Frost wasn't looking at him, he could sense that he was the reason behind her glaring. She said sharply, "Young man, you answer when I send you a telepathic message." Oh, that. Although he had experienced a tingling sensation, he simply threw up his guard and allowed himself to drift deeper into slumber. He didn't like the way that sounded. "I would have been less gentle if Logan hadn't already gone to get you." Tired of being told what to do without knowing why, he asked, "What's going on?" They owed him room and board, but not enough to force him to sit down and be quiet like a good little boy. Mr. Summers, Cyclops, was operating the pre-flight as quickly as his hands could while strapped in at the helm. He hadn't responded to the blonde's question, but it didn't matter because he said, "Sorry, your uniform's not ready yet, but as long as you wear that shield everyone should know you're with us." Logan, who was seated directly to his right, turned to look at him. "Something's happened, something bad, and I suggested to Slim that we bring you along." "I'm flattered." "Don't be." The man frowned. "We're going to clean up a mess? If people are hurt, wouldn't Jay or Josh be better choices? Neither of them is ready for what you're gonna be seeing, not as squeamish," Logan said sternly. The burly man's jaw tightened in anger as he said, "Besides, there's not much chance of finding survivors." Scott eventually made the decision to tell him, keeping his eyes fixed on the control panel. The engines hummed to life, vibrating the hull as the plane came to life. A little over 20 minutes ago, an explosion destroyed most of Stamford, just inside Connecticut. "We're going to help in the rescue and cleanup effort. You can handle yourself around the dead and dying, based on what Emma and Logan have told me," the Cyclopean X-Man said. Naruto's tan face turned pale, his muscles tensing up uncontrollably. "With as many clones of yourself as you can make, you could make quite the difference in the cleanup and rescuing any survivors." Before he let the statement linger, however, it sounded far more hopeful than what Logan had said. Whispering, "I get the picture," Naruto's curiosity and confusion vanished, leaving only emptiness in their place as the Blackbird lifted off the ground. He hardly noticed the force of gravity. Concerned that he might not be prepared, Scott glanced at the blonde, but he could see the determination in his eyes. He was ready for what he was about to see, even though he might not like it. "Good, we're inbound at 5 minutes. Even though it was a grim thought, he found solace in the fact that he hadn't eaten since the previous evening. Is that the only way to explain it? A terrifying nightmare after the catastrophe. It seemed as though the land had been scarred and the people were dead and dying long after the explosion. The smell of scorched earth and ozone seemed to linger, only occasionally replaced by the smell of burnt flesh. The sun never broke through the dense black clouds overhead, and the air was still heavy with smoke and dirt. Capes were scattered everywhere. He knew a few from stories told by the other students or from the media, but many were unknown because of the sheer number of people present. A slab of concrete was transported between more than a dozen clones. They carried it silently, their faces set in their somber silence. Even though it must have weighed an easy 10 or so tons, the larger chunks were broken up into smaller pieces by the occasional Rasengan grinding. "Ronan." One head in the throng of blondes called out, tilting up and toward the collar for his people. The name was a bit too obvious. That's probably why Logan had grinned as he gave it to him. He was waved urgently over by the visored headmaster, who was standing with a few other heroes and several emergency personnel. After nodding that he had heard him, he vanished in a flash of movement, leaving his clones to work, and then he was back at his side. He caught himself on the in-the-field protocol and said, "Yes, Mr. Summer, Cyclops?" The X-Man gestured down to the debris in front of them because he didn't think his error warranted retaliation just yet. "We need you to lift this. I'm going to cut through the parts holding it down, then I want you to get it out of here in as few pieces as you can, doing your best not to jostle or drop it, understood?" The teenager smiled broadly. The mass protruding from the earth was ringed by a circle of 5 clones plus the original. And that was only one of the tasks he had assisted with. He would be called in at any time to assist with slag bodies or, more often than not, to play the role of simple muscle and numbers. In a similar vein, he never allowed the number of clones in attendance to fall below 3 figures, making every effort to assist and avoiding burnout too soon. He vaguely remembered being told to rest, but that advice was ignored because of the numerous attacks on his previous residence. It felt like a living nightmare. He was aware that he had to assist as long as he could. His unusual stamina kept him just ahead of the aches of exhaustion, but seeing such once, let alone twice, was enough to infuse his weary limbs with energy and keep him moving. Even if it only meant a secret glance here or there, the mutant veterans all checked in on their temporary team member in between tasks. Wolverine gave the new X-Men member a favorable glance, even though the permanence had not yet been called into question. The child was thriving. The other children would have either rested or puked their guts during the whole ordeal. He hadn't done either for those who needed to rest. The child was taking up as much slack as he could. He was a machine. He hid his grin and returned his attention to the task at hand. The ruined steel beams were slid apart in 2 large pieces, and claws flashed when a clone appeared and took the other. He wasn't overly shocked. Others, however, were also observing the grimly silent teenager, noting his skills for future reference. They had been there for 39 hours straight, and as soon as he was back on the Blackbird, he was fast asleep. He had no recollection of tumbling back into the scalloped seat. He also couldn't remember fastening his seatbelt. He could practically feel the adrenaline flow stop when they were formally informed that they had done everything they could for the time being, because they were all pretty fried even if their creator left the scene. Any clones that remained continued to work, remaining until their energy ran out. He only remembered being abruptly awakened by a loose shove, not really remembering strapping himself in. "Wake up, kid," he grunted in recognition of his awareness and blinked wearily. Wasn't sleeping, he attempted to deny. Furthermore, he wasn't yet. This was a quick power nap. Nothing would wake him when he went to sleep until he was ready. He wasn't physically exhausted. He could sleep, of course. But his mind was the most exhausted. The gruesome work and the recurring hordes of shadow clones had simply exhausted him. "Yeah, tell me, another one." The insistency of sleep was starting to give way to annoyance. He sneered. "You were born with a beard." A cuff to the back of the head is applied after silence. All right. He was awake now. "Don't be a smartass." Better than being a dumbass. Hank actually added his own thoughts, seeing the humor of the moment as a relief from the terrible memories of their recent work. "Now, children, take the high road." The blonde yawned and complained, "Which is the road where I get to kick his ass?" Scott shook his head after watching the two incredulously. He wished he could remove the visor that was preventing him from seeing clearly. "Enough. We could all use some sleep. Shower, and get what rest you can." He was not in any doubt this was far from over for them. He sensed that the boy would be receiving attention in the future as his gaze returned to the blonde who had fallen back into his seat. Emma projected to him, "Scott, we need to talk," as they got off the plane, many of them going to the showers in the lower-level locker rooms. "About what? And is there a reason why we aren't having this conversation out loud?" Rhetoric. He didn't know the what, but he knew why. Roughly 10 in the morning. Knock, 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 knock. Despite being much more forceful, the door rattled as if it were about to be ripped from its hinges, more like a series of boomings. Shunk, shunk, shunk. Ah. The unappreciated knock had signaled the arrival of 3 pencils that had shot halfway through the door and lodged themselves there at eye level. Even though he was half asleep, his goal was to frighten, not to murder. Santo, attempting to avoid the whole screaming like a girl incident, snarled from the other side of the door, "What the hell, Punto?" Irony, who always had a good joke, wasn't so nice. There were more than one. "I see, you just screamed like a girl." Regretfully, the knob was still off because Logan had forced his way in earlier to wake him, indicating that the doorframe was probably where the knocking had occurred. Knowing that he was there, Julian pushed the door open. "Come on, get up, we want to hear about Stamford." His mind was filled with images. "You really don't," he complained. Lifting his head and collapsing face first into his pillow, he bravely said, "Now go away or I maim." However, he was unsuccessful in his blearily search for additional projectiles. Oh no. All for a kunai's sake. He would even accept a paperclip, a Q-tip. Even yes, owning someone with a Q-tip was something his dazed mind could see. "Get up, Blondie," Santo added. "We all want to know how screwed things were." His stomach moaned pitifully. "Oh no, what time is it?" he muttered, groaning into his pillow as he gave in. At least that's how it sounded in his mind. "It's Wednesday." "Really?" He spoke around mouthfuls of food, making it hardly comprehensible to everyone else. "Yeah, you all got back really late last night. You've only been out for 9 hours, Cecily said. Oh no, he probably could have punched Santo in the face for waking him up so early if he had known it had only been that long. A loose group of students interested in his involvement in the event at Stamford gathered around him, watching him eat an odd dozen cheeseburgers from the cafeteria here. There is no secrecy despite its size. It could not be concealed. The entire cleanup was covered by news crews, who occasionally focused on the people who were present. Take Naruto, for instance. "Where the hell are you putting that?" Nori snorted, her chin resting in the palm of her gauntlet. He was still trim after the 10th burger. The stomach is not at all swollen. He gave his belly a tender pat and said, "Love my metabolism, blast furnace." Julian gave an eye roll with expectant eyes. He said, "Oh, haha, spill already, Stamford." Fubar, you see, he was picking up knowledge in class. "Looks like a few square miles were blown all to hell," he replied. "We cleaned up the leftovers," he said, carefully selecting his words. Logan was correct. He didn't think they could manage the more intricate version. He was being extremely ambiguous when he said, "I can't say for anyone else, but I worked a lot of cleanup, moving debris and stuff with my clones." For his bizarre tale of Galactus erasing Stamford from the map with a flaming fart, a few people gave Santo a feeble glare. In all honesty, why did they listen to his cockamamie tall tales at all? Even so, it had initially caused some laughter. Approximately 8 hours prior, shortly after the return from Stamford, the argument did not improve. "How can you be so frustrating this early in the morning?" All you have to do is look out the window to see that I'm right, each haggard person said as he followed her down the stairs. He turned back to him and said, "They have to be pushed, Scott, they have to be ready." Before Visor even exchanged his sunglasses, the scowl on Scott's face said it all. He retorted, "I'm not arguing that, Emma," demonstrating that he wasn't completely dismissing her after all. This school was meant to be a refuge for mutants. But they're still just children and I don't want to see their childhoods torn away from them needlessly. I think it's a little late for that, darling. He continued to furrow his brow until he reached the bottom of the stairs. "I know why you're doing this." "Do you?" she inquired, genuinely doubting his comprehension of the circumstances. Rather than being wholly sarcastic, she turned to face him, her hard blue eyes saying, "The news is out, Scott, the mutant population has been decimated, and sooner or later our enemies will come for us." At the heavy thunk at the base of the door, she stopped her argument to pull it open even though he knew the students shouldn't be up. He asked, "Is someone at the door?" It was hardly 1 in the morning. Emma reached for the knob, but she was not going to let that stop her. "If you want blood on your hands, so be it, but I'm going to protect these children at any cost." She would later be reminded by hindsight to use more caution when speaking. Before all the blood left her face, she only needed to open the door and glance down. Jay? With Emma following closely behind, Scott headed straight for the infirmary while the young Guthrie limped in his arms. He probably didn't have to yell, "Call Josh Foley. Get him to the infirmary." However, considering the boy's condition, some things were unavoidable. Now, he was sleeping at Laurie's bedside, where he had been spending his free time trying to heal her and keeping her company. "Elixir," was the mental cry that gave him a rough shake. "Huh? Wah?" The persistent voice hammered through his head, and drowsiness gave in. "What's going on?" Hank had just returned home. He was taken aback when Scott burst in because he had been checking his ongoing lab work before bed. "Scott?" But he saw the teenager and his bloodied condition much more quickly thanks to his feline eyes and senses. "Help me, Hank, Jay's been hurt," Emma said, hurrying up behind him. However, the furry X-Man's assessment was far more accurate than his own. He saw the damage right away. "Hurt? Scott, the poor boy has been." "I know, Hank, now help me." Once more, the door opened. This time, a teen with golden skin will be revealed with worry etched on his face. He said, "Where is O?" No, he was starting to panic because he was sure he was seeing this. What happened to Jay? Oh God, where are his wings? Jay came around once more, perhaps in response to Josh's voice, but he showed no signs of consolation in his environment. He was actually in a panic. His eyes widened in fear as he cried out, "No!" Just as the once winged boy began to flail about, Hank leapt to the table and yelled, "Get away! He's pulling out his stitches, hold him down!" The teenager was so furious that he and Scott had to restrain him to prevent him from hurting himself any more. Elixir was swiftly led out and through the doors by Emma. He tried to look back, but he only managed to catch a glimpse before the door slid shut. "Miss Frost, why is he?" If only for her pupil, she made an effort to maintain her composure and poise. She had always been cold and calculating. "Come along, Josh." However, the adolescent was following the same path as the traumatized Guthrie. "Why? I can help him. You will do as you're told," she said. She felt uneasy when she said, "Your presence was agitating him." Who did this to him? His emotional turmoil caused his face to slightly drop, and he said, "His thoughts are disjointed. I don't know, I just don't know. We have to tell the others," was not even close to the end of his outburst. "No, this would be a kindness, until we know what's going on," she said solemnly. "I need you to forget what you've seen." Her hand was on his temple as he was processing those ominous last words. "Forget." He swayed, his eyes glassing over, then regained consciousness. What happened?" She gave the order, "Go back to bed." With a hint of psychic influence, she made up her mind as she watched the teenager shuffle away in a daze.
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.